The story begins in a bright and beautiful palace where the Whitgreen family lives. The family's eldest son, Essie Whitgreen, was talking to his sister about her birthday coming up. He asked if she needed anything or if there was anything she wanted. Lydia Whitgreen smiled at her brother and told him that she didn't need anything. However, Essie said in surprise that she always said that she doesn't even like dolls. By the way, right now, our heroine was quietly burning love letters in front of her brother. Then, in response to Essie's words, she laughed. In fact, the fact that she doesn't want anything is a real lie. But what does Lydia want then? It's simple, really. Her main wish is not to die at the hands of her brother Essie Whitgreen. The main thing is to survive. Anyway, she threw away the last letter and said that in any case, right after her birthday, there would be Essie's birthday. Approaching him, she said that he would finally officially become an adult because he would turn 18. By the way, it is on this day that her younger brother's coming-of-age ceremony will be held. This is the day when the heroine will appear before them. And this is also the day when our heroine will finally escape from here. Lydia could not wait for it. The action then takes us to the night city of Seoul, which was quite lively at that hour. In the past reality, she was a university student, but if she hadn't met the man who was stalking her, her life wouldn't have ended like this. The man was bewildered and shouted at her, asking why the hell she was rejecting him if she had smiled at him recently. The girl was very scared. One way or another, she understood that she was not going to give up so easily, so she started to run away and did not even understand what was happening around her. In the end, without even noticing, she found herself on the road, right along which a truck was rushing at full speed. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. She really was unlucky. She thought she was going to die there anyway. Soon after, the action takes us to a bright room containing a crib and a baby, as well as a nanny who was looking after Milady. Yes, that's right. Our heroine was reborn in this world and became 2-year-old Lydia Whitgreen. What could be better than living a life dying at the hands of a stalker and now ending up here? Everything here was like in a fantasy novel. Of course, the royal family ruled here, and there was even class inequality. Even like in the most popular novels, there was magic in this world. Well, our heroine was lucky to be born with a spoon in her mouth, not just gold, but diamond. She became not only a noblewoman, but also the eldest daughter of a ducal family. Red carpets covered all the roads she walked on. In turn, she only had to step on them and live happily. Since her previous life had been so unsuccessful, all this must have been a gift from God, as our heroine believed. But of course, everything couldn't be so great, because she didn't rejoice for long. The action takes us a little into the future, or more precisely, to the night when Lydia got out of bed, thinking about how thirsty she was. Passing through one of the doors, to her surprise, the girl noticed a glow, as well as the voices of her parents. Coming closer, she decided to eavesdrop. She suddenly heard the words, "If Lydia finds out, she must be very upset." The girl, of course, did not understand what they were talking about. Then, the father said that from childhood to this day, he raised her as his own daughter. Remembering all the privileges, they were shattered in the blink of an eye. It turns out that she is not a biological daughter, but an adopted one. Falling to the ground, she couldn't believe it was true. How could everything be so good and then so bad soon? Things were as follows. Even before the marriage, the Duchess was diagnosed with infertility. The woman was 100% convinced of this. So after going through difficulties, they decided to adopt Lydia. But as it turned out, this doctor was actually a fraud. As a result, her brother was already growing in the womb of the Duchess, which means that now she has neither status nor life. All the following days, she realized that now she would not be able to return the diamond spoon. Wouldn't she be abandoned altogether when her brother was born? While the nanny was trying to figure out what was going on with Lydia, our heroine was thinking that if her parents decided to kick her out, she hoped that she would at least be able to pack her things. After the nanny asked if everything was okay, the girl got up from her tear-stained pillow and said that she wanted to eat. In any case, she didn't even know what she could take with her. She spent enough time to realize that it would be best to move everything to her room. From day to day, she felt a certain suspense. because she did not know when her parents would get tired of her. Would they throw her out of the house today or tomorrow? So 7 years have passed. Why haven't they kicked her out yet? Lydia couldn't explain why she was so emotional. By the way, today was her birthday, and she was 11 years old. She was wondering when they would kick her out anyway. After all, her brother was old enough to run away, so why were they keeping her around? Were they trying to keep her away? After thinking for a moment, she jumped up happily, thinking that this would be the perfect scenario. She would even say that she was incredibly lucky. At that moment, 7-year-old Essie Whitgreen walked into the room. One of his special features was that he always took his sister's side. Seeing her brother, our heroine ran up to him and asked what happened. The guy happily said that today was her birthday. Soon, he pulled out a huge bag from over his shoulder and said that it was his gift for her. Lydia looked at it all in bewilderment and was surprised at how huge the gift was. When did they manage to prepare it? In any case, she began to thank him, but pulling the string to open her gift, Lydia's joyful face suddenly changed to one of horror. An unknown girl fell to the ground, looking at Lydia in tears. Our heroine looked at the girl's face and realized that she was a maid. Her name was Melissa. Of course, the girl asked in confusion what it was. Essie smiled happily looking at his sister and said that it was a doll. He explained that he was going to find the exact same one that broke, but he was told that it was no longer for sale. Anyway, he apologized for it, coming out all rumpled, but he still tried to prepare it. Then he asked if his sister liked his gift. Our heroine was shocked. The doll she once played with looked very realistic, but it was just a toy. In turn, this little genius dressed the maid in the same dress and dragged her here. How could anyone even think of such a thing? Does Essie really think this is normal? Can't a 7-year-old tell people from dolls? She slapped him. Lydia screamed in horror and asked her puzzled brother what he was doing, and soon ordered him to untie the girl right now. Essie asked if she was not satisfied with the gift. Our heroine asked how she could not be angry after that. He must understand what she meant. Anyway, she told him to stand in the corner and raise his hands. Looking at her younger brother, she even assumed that he had some problems with his head. One way or another, she asked him never to do that again. The guy snorted. Lydia hoped he understood, even though it seemed hard for him to understand. She was a complete fool to think that. Soon after, the action takes us to a park where our heroine was sitting and enjoying nature. At that very moment, Essie started walking towards her again, so the girl looked at her brother and asked what happened. The guy lifted the tied-up butler, saying that she didn't like his last doll, so he hoped that this doll would suit her. Our heroine even spat out her tea from what she saw. She couldn't understand what her brother was talking about. She hoped her brother didn't think she was mad at him just because she didn't like the doll. He was a psychopath after all. And again, the girl screamed in horror, asking what the hell Essie was doing. She asked him to come to his senses and also to free the guy and get out of here. Looking at the perplexed Essie, the girl understood that most likely he was thinking that everything was so simple. She believed that for her brother, such concepts as family, people, animals, objects, etc. do not exist. All of this is just toys for him. Lydia suddenly thought that next time she should punish her brother much more severely. And again, she was a fool to think so, because the problems only got worse. After a while, the action takes us to the library, where Lydia, to her horror, discovered that she was in a novel. This book is The Spring of the Goddess Agrita. The plot of the book unfolds in a special world. Not only our heroine, but in this world, there are also many other characters that we will get to know. The villain here was Essie Whitgreen. The supporting character was Lydia Whitgreen. The girl hoped that it was just a joke. Either the names of real people were used here, or they were chosen at random. At this time, the maid Bessie, who always looked after our heroine, was busy cleaning. But at that moment, she heard the screams of my lady. Turning around, she asked what happened, to which Lydia thrust the book in front of her face and asked what was in the book. However, at that moment, the girl asked in bewilderment if there really weren't just blank pages here. Lydia, hearing these words, fell into a stupor. She knew Bessie had no reason to lie to her. The girl flipped through the pages and said that no matter how you looked, there were white sheets of paper everywhere. Already in the evening, the girl continued reading this book. From the words of the plot, she noticed that the events of the last days exactly repeated the plot of the book. It was the world described in the novel. She couldn't believe that she could see the future. Putting these thoughts aside, she decided that she was not crazy, or maybe this was her special gift given to her to remember the past. However, this was not the most important problem. According to this novel, there was another interesting detail. She will be killed again. Our heroine read all these words in shock, not believing that it would happen again. The book said that her parents would die 2 years later due to an incurable disease. Soon after their death, it would be confirmed that Lydia had been adopted. Essie's attitude towards his sister will change dramatically, because he realizes that there is not a drop of his parents' blood inside his sister, which is why she does not dare to look him in the face. Eventually, it will all come to a standoff where Essie will stab her sister with her blade. She will be killed by her own brother. When Essie grows up, he will become the head of the house. When upset about something, he will turn into a tyrant, mercilessly eliminating everything that irritates him. But in the end, this evil man will fall in love with the heroine, Agrita. He fell in love with her at first sight, and by the way, he even got rid of everyone who surrounded her. Despite all this, Lydia's death day would soon come. With belated regret, the girl decided that there was no point in even dreaming about anything. She shouldn't plan anything anymore. The best thing for her to do would be to treat her brother kindly without scolding him. Finally, the morning came. Lydia had not slept all night and was racking her brains over what to do. Luckily, she made a decision, and she decided to run away. Either way, she fell to the ground, thinking that she wouldn't succeed anyway. If Essie finds out about her departure now, he will be very angry. And what's more, he might even kill her earlier than according to the plot. Looking at the ceiling, the girl understood that Essie, according to the plot, would fall in love with the heroine at first sight. At that time, he wouldn't care about his sister, and then she would pack all her things and run away. She thought for a long time about what she should take that day. However, Lydia decided that there was one more important thing to take care of. Before that, she had to prevent her parents from dying. In ancient times, it was believed that it was enough to pray sincerely for the heavens to hear you. That is why she turned to the Lord and asked to hear her as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the prayers did not help. However, the day came when the bells rang and the priest read the words, saying that the dead would rest in peace. Our heroine was very upset that the heavens could hear her, but were still unable to change the future. At this point, Essie called his sister, and taking her hand, he told her that now there were only 2 of them left. Looking at her brother, she knew it was true. They were alone. All that was left was a minor character who would die at the hands of a villain and the future of that same villain. Our heroine suddenly started crying because she understood that she had screwed up. Essie asked, in surprise, if she was really crying. Even though she gave up on all of this, her parents' death still saddens her. But what about the escape? It didn't go as smoothly as planned. She didn't even notice how quickly time flew by, so she had no idea when it would all happen. Meanwhile, the girl was asking if all the invitations had been sent properly. She wanted to make sure there were no mistakes and to see if everything was okay with the dishes. At this point, our heroine turned to Alex and asked him to go down to the basement to check the list to see if any things were missing. Soon, the action takes us outside. Lydia seemed to be calmly drinking tea, but this was not so because her hands were shaking and sweat was running down her forehead uncontrollably. The girl tried to calm herself down, saying that everything would happen at the right time and in the right place, so there was no need to be so nervous. One way or another, she was glad that tomorrow would be the day when the fateful meeting between the main character and the villain would take place at the event. For him, seeing Agrita for the first time, everything else will lose its meaning. So thanks to this, the secondary character will successfully escape. According to the plans, everything was supposed to be perfect. The escape was supposed to take place at the opening of the party, because that's when the heroine would show up. The moment when Essie falls in love with Agrita is the only chance for our heroine. After that, the guy will get rid of everyone who surrounds Agrita, and it will take him a few days. The girl understood that if she missed this chance, she would go straight to the next world. In any case, she decided to drink tea, but suddenly got scared. The reason for her fright was the unexpected arrival of the Duke, who came to visit his sister. Bessie soon brought another cup of tea and then told them that they looked happy together. Our heroine had heard this too often, so now it didn't matter at all. At this point, Essie said that he was going to look at the clock tower tomorrow morning, so he wanted to know his sister's opinion. The girl asked if he was talking about the one in the square, that is to go with her. Essie nodded, saying that she wanted to go there too. Taking a sip of tea, the girl tried to remember if she had actually said that. She didn't know how Essie could still remember it. She didn't want to anyway. She was going to run away. The girl said she had seen the chapel before. It was so old that there was nothing of value in it. Our heroine didn't understand what kind of stupid excuse she had come up with, but she said it was true. Then she asked if it wouldn't be better to destroy the chapel and rebuild it. As soon as Essie said that if his sister said that he would think twice, Lydia immediately realized that she shouldn't have said that. She tried in horror to understand what kind of crazy things she had done, because she should have understood everything much earlier. The very next morning, Essie approached Lydia and reminded her of what they had talked about the day before. Lydia, perplexed, asked what he was talking about. The boy smiled sweetly at his sister and said that he had figured it out completely. That clock tower was now destroyed. Our heroine's brain stopped functioning from yet another strange action of her brother. She asked him a couple of times what he said. The girl asked him if he meant that he had destroyed the chapel in the square. The guy just nodded his head. Anyone hearing this would think the chapel was some kind of pathetic sandcastle. Lydia asked him why he did it. Did he understand that this was madness? The guy, in turn, said that it would have been even better if he had done it a little earlier. Then he held out the cookies for his sister, but she said that she had had enough. Lydia, meanwhile, realized that her brother really was a psychopath. But why did she say such a stupid thing yesterday? She meant that it would be better to tear it down and build a new one. Any other person would understand that this is a joke, but Essie is not joking at all. He is sincere in everything. How could this psychopathic villain become her younger brother? He didn't even think about the random victims, so she has to justify herself in front of their chapel. She sighed, hoping that they had all gone to a better world. Suddenly, our heroine raised her head and turned to her brother. The girl asked when he destroyed the tower, to which the guy calmly replied that he did it in the morning. Our heroine jumped up in incredible shock and rushed somewhere. Essie asked her sister in surprise what happened. Meanwhile, the butler stood in the corridor, to whom Lydia addressed herself and ordered him to stand still. Approaching him, she ordered him to bring a list of everyone who died in the collapse of the chapel. The guy, perplexed, said that he would do it right away. Looking at the running butler, the girl hoped that the thought that came into her head was not true. Still, she thought that she was worrying too much, so she should calm down. At that moment, her younger brother came up to her and asked what was wrong. It all came down to the fact that this morning the heroine Agrita entered the clock tower. On this blessed day of charity, she was going to pray for the welfare of all. Yet this villain, her younger brother, destroyed the chapel this morning. Really, what could go wrong? Lydia barely restrained herself from saying anything unnecessary. She gave the order just in case. Just by the way, she was sure that the same Agrita could not have died because she is the main heroine of this world. Just then, a butler ran up to Lydia and handed her the list she had asked for. The girl took it in her hands and thanked him. She soon began to study this document, and to her happiness, discovered that the losses were not as great as she had thought. Suddenly, that very name appeared before her eyes. Agrita Grace is dead. The girl did not believe it until the very end, and considered it a lie. At that moment, the leaf fell from her hands. Essie turned to her in surprise, noticing that she was almost fainting. At that moment, Lydia asked how Agrita could die. After that, she started mumbling about something. So Essie brought her to her senses and asked her what she was talking about. Our heroine at that moment felt nothing but the sound of her mind collapsing. This is just madness. In her mind, she screamed at the top of her lungs, thinking that this boy was crazy. He killed the main character. How could he do that? And again, after that, she just ran forward without even saying anything. The guy asked his sister in bewilderment what happened. Our heroine, in turn, was not going to answer his questions, because after all this, there was only one option left for her. At that moment, she locked herself in the room. Initially, she planned to use it in case of an unsuccessful escape and tried to save it until the very end. She reached into her locker, thinking that she had hoped she wouldn't have to spend it at all. According to the novel, her life was supposed to end very tragically, so she did everything she could to survive. This is one of the ways. As she opened the box, she said to herself that originally this was what Agrita was supposed to have, but from the very beginning, there were 3 gods in this world. The first god was the god of destruction, followed by the god of time, and finally the goddess of love. People built temples for each of them. However, 10 years ago, one of the oracles descended upon all the temples. On the day when the full moon illuminates the lowest point of the world, the goddess will appear. She was supposed to take care of everyone and look after everyone. Opinions are divided on the authenticity of the prophecy. The question was what the meaning actually was. In general, scientists argued that the day of the brightest full moon should be calculated. However, there was a failure. The full moon of the oracle's words has nothing to do with the real full moon. It symbolizes the prince. This principle of the empire was called the Little Sun. The crown prince hid his identity outside the castle in order to understand the lives of ordinary people. In a cold and squalid alley, he helped a poor child, but after that, he accidentally ran into Agrita. Because of this incident, the girl will receive the title of crown princess, and according to the words of the oracle, she will become the new empress in the future. When this happens, she will be honored to be worshipped as a goddess. The temple and the scholars will learn the truth, but all this will happen later. The temple knows nothing now, so it will call upon them to sincerely welcome the representatives of God on earth when he descends to them. Well, the item in the box is an item created in a temple dedicated to the god of time. This bead has the ability to turn back time exactly 1 day. In order to cause the effect, this bead had to be broken. It is a real gift prepared by the Temple of Time for Agrita, and it took 10 years to create 30 beads. Well, where did our heroine get these precious beads from? It's simple. She stole them. Only 15 were stolen by her on purpose. If she is caught, the temple will sentence her to hang, and they will definitely try to kill her. She believes that stealing half was in good faith. After all, she's going to use this to save Agrita. So if you look at it that way, it's not exactly simple theft. With this bead, she can turn back time and save Agrita, but the more she thinks about it, the more amazing it seems. Remembering her joyful brother with his wonderful news that the chapel was destroyed, the girl asked herself only one question: how could he kill the heroine? The anger meter reached its limit, because if it weren't for Essie, she wouldn't have done this. She wanted to curse her brother right in the face. As she began to swing, she decided that she should come to her senses because she had to break the bead. Suddenly, she thought her escape would only succeed if Agrita was alive. At that moment, she realized again that just by breaking the bead, the day would instantly roll back, and since everything would return in time, then she could do something. Meanwhile, Essie was discussing something with the butler, but at that very moment, a woman's scream was heard. Turning their heads, they noticed Lydia rushing towards them with all her might. What happened? Our heroine thought that enough time had passed since her brother grew up. She didn't want to die prematurely, so she still held back and wasn't honest, but at that very moment she screamed and told her brother that he was crazy. To think that people's lives are not worth a penny is too convenient. Looking into her brother's eyes, she told him her sincere wish, asking him not to live like this. Soon after, she broke the bead. The action moves to an unknown place. At this moment, someone was actively calling Lydia. Our heroine turned around in horror and noticed that the person was Bessie. The nanny, in turn, held out a shawl, saying that the weather was getting colder. After thanking the nanny and taking the shawl, Lydia thought only about whether she had returned to yesterday. Looking around, she caught herself thinking that she remembered how she had gone out onto the balcony yesterday, and then asked Bessie to bring her an autumn shawl. Our heroine then again caught herself thinking that she had returned to the past. After that, the girl fell onto a chair. Bessie approached the lady in confusion and asked if she was okay, to which Lydia told her that she was perfectly fine. Her legs were just a little tired. Then she asked the maid to leave for a while because she wanted to be alone. Bessie agreed, but asked again if she was sure everything was okay. As soon as Lydia said that everything was fine, Bessie headed for the exit and asked to call her if she needed anything. After these words, the balcony door slammed shut, and our heroine was left alone with her thoughts. She knew that her younger and already grown brother had neither common sense nor morals. Although she was careful in her actions, she could not understand what was in his mind. However, raising her head, she caught herself thinking that this even chilled her soul. It was that feeling when you speak out with all sincerity. Even if it was a little, it still became easier for her. Time beads are just super. At that moment, she stood up from her chair, remembering about the beads. She should check them. Having already moved into the room, as was logical, there were 14 of them left. She used one of the 15 beads, so everything is correct. Soon after, the girl opened the door and began to look out into the corridor. Finally, seeing the butler on the horizon, she asked him to come to her for a second. The guy came up to her, and Lydia immediately asked him what date it was. The butler looked at her in surprise and said that today was September 13th. Looking at the puzzled butler, she understood that if the date was yesterday, then there could be no doubt everything worked. This bead is really extraordinary. At this point, the girl said that she simply forgot the date, so she asked, "And now he can go." Closing the door to her room again, Lydia realized that Agrita, who used them only for the sake of others, was no less amazing. That is why she was called a goddess. If she had been given such powers, she would have been so greedy, which is not usually her nature. Agrita used them for the benefit of others, without ulterior motives. In any case, the girl again threw away all thoughts, because thanks to these beads, she will be able to save Agrita. All that remains for her is to prevent the death of the main character. Without further ado, she will say that the reason was the clock tower. Of course, the main reason is Essie himself, but she cannot change that. Meanwhile, the time was moving towards noon. Essie would propose entering the chapel this evening, half a day later. She knew it would be better to go there now rather than tomorrow afternoon. Her brother had been busy all day and had not left his office, and it was rare for him to see a glimmer of light in the evening. Lydia knew that only he could achieve such abnormal results in such a short time. He really was a real psychopathic villain. She naturally shouldn't say that the chapel is old, or that it wouldn't hurt to demolish it, but that's not enough, because her opponent is Essie. Suddenly standing up, she wondered what should she do. Was there really no other reason for her refusal? At that very moment, enlightenment came into her head, or rather a new safe and plausible excuse. So evening came. She went down to the drawing room to have tea, and no good reason came to mind. Smiling slyly, she thought that she had come up with something else instead. Since she had no reason to say no, she would do everything not to say it. Before thinking that this sounded like the ravings of a mare, one only had to listen to her plan further. Essie was in the garden that day and seemed to have found her by chance. When they met, he suggested that they go on a tour of the clock tower. The best way to turn down an offer is to not hear it at all. In other words, as long as she doesn't run into her brother this time, everything will be fine. She deliberately moved the scene to the living room. Her brother was busy with work. He would spend the next hour in his office, and before that, she had to leave. She just needs to go to her room and not come out until tomorrow. It's worth the time to worry, but a tragic death of a main character like this would never have happened just like that. At that very moment, the brilliant plan, as well as the thoughts of our heroine, were interrupted by her brother turning to her. The girl turned around in confusion and noticed Essie in front of her. The guy looked at his shocked sister and asked if she was okay. Our heroine, however, continued to look at him in bewilderment and ask herself how he ended up here and why the events of the past should not have been repeated. At that moment, a maid entered the room, noticed the Duke, and said that she had sent Alex some time ago. Lydia asked in confusion what had happened, to which the girl replied that she had not been herself since the morning. Bessie was surprised and shocked that the lady did not respond when she called her, as if she had completely withdrawn into herself. The maid thought that the master should know about this, so she sent Alex to fetch him. As soon as he said this, Essie came down here. By the way, she said that the lady's thoughts were completely out of place. Our heroine was in incredible shock that such a setup from Bessie happened. Essie looked at his sister in surprise and said that if he had known this earlier, he would have come to her immediately. Lydia said with embarrassment that everything was fine. The girl immediately thought that if her brother again offered her to go to the clock tower, she would not be able to find an excuse to refuse. Suddenly, she caught herself thinking that she could take advantage of this misunderstanding and pretend to be ill. Having decided to act on this plan, Lydia suddenly feigned a headache, saying that she really felt unwell. The girl began to demonstratively bow back, but at that moment, Essie grabbed his sister and asked her if she was okay. Our heroine suddenly felt an unplanned admiration. Her brother's torso was strong and quite adult. She hoped that she had managed to push her brother away from her. However, at that moment, the guy looked at his sister with empathy and asked where and what hurt. Lydia thought that if she described her symptoms in too much detail, her lie would be quickly exposed. She said that she had little energy, that she felt weak, and had no appetite. The girl said she didn't know what was happening to her, but she was exhausted. Essie kept hugging her, and it seemed strange. She remembered how he wanted to outgrow her when he was so little, but now she felt so protected. At that time, he was cute, and if we talk about beauty, Essie can be compared to an elegant doll. The guy suddenly asked if Lydia had gone out anywhere. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, and he told her that since he had been busy all the time now, he could devote a little time to her. The guy then suggested that they go to the square together the following day. After all, she had said earlier that she wanted to see the clock tower. Lydia screamed in her soul as loud as she could. Her plan had failed once again. Essie said he would have time during lunch, and our heroine suddenly began to cough, telling him that she couldn't do it. At that very moment, he ordered the servants to call the doctor, and if the doctor who was in their mansion was not able to take care of his sister, then he was not worth a penny. After he said that he wouldn't leave it like that, our heroine started hitting the red button, thinking that this was no longer a joke and the situation was becoming dangerous. The girl suddenly screamed and said that it was all because of the dust. She coughed because of it, and nothing serious happened. The doctor brings her powerful supplements. She understood that if doctors were called in like this, 9 times out of 10, they would be morally destroyed. Their doctor was a father of 3 children. At this point, Essie sighed heavily, and soon after, put his hand to his sister's head, saying that she had no fever. The guy decided that this whole so-called problem was a distraction. In that case, he suggested going out as early as possible and having lunch in the fresh air. Lydia, with tears in her eyes, understood that things were incredibly bad because she could not run away now. She could do nothing but agree. However, she didn't understand why they were in the square and making so much noise. Why was Essie upsetting his own existence? Why was he like this? But at that moment, Bessie looked at our heroine and said that they looked great together. Of course, it was sad that history turned out this way, but still the tower has not yet been destroyed. Our heroine's ultimate goal is to prevent Agrita's death. At least she shouldn't have died under the rubble of the chapel. When Lydia was getting ready for the walk, she said for sure that she would never say anything bad about the tower, even with a knife at her throat, and even if a sword came into play. Our heroine knew that in any case, she had to think positively about the tower. She had to avoid Agrita as long as possible. Just look at the tower and come back. The action moves to the main hall, where the butler and Bessie were. As soon as they saw the lady, they were pleasantly shocked because she looked beautiful. Our heroine had heard people say that when she dressed up, she looked like a blooming rose. Quite a nice compliment. Lydia bowed in gratitude. However, she decided that the title Blooming Roses was quite funny because roses have thorns. It's a kind of combat gear, of course, against Essie. In any case, she decided she should get back to the main thing. She should think of this as a distraction for the perfect escape. By the way, it had been a long time since she had left the house at all. Bessie suddenly asked the Duke if he was coming down. Suddenly she cried out. The girl looked at the Duke and was incredibly shocked by his beauty. Lydia understood that even though he was like a scary ghost to her, she still had to admit that the suit suited him very well. The boy walked up to his sister and extended his hand, asking if they could go already. Still without thinking twice, she took her younger brother by the hand and said that they could go. As Lydia stepped outside, she remembered it was 11 a.m. Agrita should be at the charity right now, not the chapel. She knew that if they were both just wandering around the square, they shouldn't run into her. However, somewhere around midday, a charity event will begin, distributing food to those in need in the center of the square. Of course, she can't go there. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Looking around, Lydia wondered what Essie would do when, to her surprise, our heroine saw a very beautiful hair clip in front of her. Essie came up to her and asked his older sister if she liked the hairpin. The girl knew that now was not the time to look at costume jewelry, but she also knew that it was worth buying. Lydia smiled and asked to give her one. Reaching into her bag, our heroine began to look for her wallet, but suddenly there was silence. The girl was horrified to realize that she couldn't find her wallet, which meant the situation was an emergency. She couldn't believe that some pickpocket had stolen her wallet. At that moment, the younger brother turned to her and asked if everything was okay. The girl only sighed heavily. Lydia, in turn, thought in horror that when she left the mansion, she definitely checked everything. She did not take out her wallet on the way. In that case, she was still curious when it had been stolen. Was it a mouse or maybe a bird? At that moment, they entered an alley, and soon Essie took out a bead, asking it to find a person. Our heroine looked at it in bewilderment and could not understand what it was. She assumed that it was some kind of means of communication, but she couldn't understand who he was ordering now. She also understood that they didn't look like the people from their home. At that moment, she thought about it, wondering what about the relationship between the psychopathic villain in the novel and the secret group. She immediately realized that these were dark gangs or several dangerous people. Essie is a real villain. Maybe it's because Essie became a duke at a young age, and he needed his own power ever since their parents died. By the way, we are not even talking about physical abilities here, a secret squad that will become his right hand. However, just because Essie has his own organization doesn't mean he formed it. So what would a psychopathic villain do in this situation? Here's the answer. This guy will kill the head of the existing organization and take his place. But why do its members who lost their leader overnight obey Essie? Our heroine did not know. She decided that they were subdued by force, and she still thinks. So Lydia eavesdropped on her brother, wondering was he talking to a gang member. In fact, the reason she hasn't been able to escape yet is because of Essie's connection to a secret organization. If she were caught trying to escape, she would die on the spot. Lydia's fears would come and go. The girl immediately became thoughtful and began to talk about how her brother should have Agrita. She prayed that the goddess would save her from the villain. At this point, Essie said that some time ago, a noble woman with red hair had her wallet stolen, so he wanted them to find this pickpocket. Soon after, he hid the bead and turned to his sister and suggested that they head to the chapel since they had come to see her. Well, the thief would be caught. Our heroine agreed, but she was still more worried about Essie's people than about the thieves of her wallet. Made her way to the chapel. she realized that she was nervous and very tired. In any case, she had to escape tonight. However, she must also be careful, because if she lets her guard down and crosses the center of the square, she may encounter Agrita. At that very moment, a voice came from the Duke's jacket, addressing the gentleman and saying that they had already found the target. Our heroine was shocked that everything happened so quickly. The guy, in turn, ordered to report all the information. Aide said the street pickpocket is so small, he looks like a child and pretends to be sick while stealing from people. Lydia was still shocked that these people were able to find the pickpocket with so little information on him. This is like the power of a criminal cartel. Essie, in turn, said that now he understands why he did not notice anything. He immediately asked for the location. The voice told the gentleman that the target was at 3 o'clock. If they could see the roof, the pickpocket was right underneath it. Without further ado, Essie grabbed his sister by the arm and began to lead her. The girl was perplexed. Raising her head, she noticed her brother's crazy look and decided that he seemed to be about to kill this guy. Noticing the boy, they were starting to catch up with the girl, mentally asked him to run as fast as possible. Essie couldn't understand why the guy avoided crowded places if he was in the very center of the square. The voice told him that the boy was afraid of being caught, and it also seemed like he was trying to escape by handing over the stolen goods to his gang. Lydia knew they had the answers they wanted. Wasn't that enough? Soon, to her horror, she heard that her brother was up to something. The girl, in horror, asked him not to even think about it, but Essie said in a cold voice that this freak should be eliminated. Our heroine was in incredible shock. Soon she remembered about Agrota and began to hope that she was not in the square now. Without even thinking, a huge explosion occurred in the center of the square, which resulted in many casualties. Realizing what horror had just happened, Lydia screamed in horror and told her brother that he was a psychopath. After some time, our heroine thanked herself for the fact that everything happened exactly this way, because when she went outside, she took a bead with her, just in case. That is to say, that's right, she spent it to go back a day again. In the central square, where Agrita was helping to distribute free food as part of a charity event, a powerful explosion suddenly went off. And of course, this led to another death of the main character. Lydia was furious and desperate. If it weren't for the explosion, the chapel wouldn't have collapsed. Our heroine couldn't understand why everything was exactly like this. Was it her fault that her wallet was stolen? Or was it the pickpocket's fault? Of course, the responsibility lies with those who are engaged in thefts right in the middle of the square. And the villain is to blame for deciding to bomb the central square. If it had happened just once, then she would have been able to understand and accept Essie's problem. But Agrita has died twice already. Why is she so unlucky? At that very moment, the girl opened her eyes in horror, asking herself if Essie was really that unlucky. By the way, she decided to take a break and check her beads. There were already 13 of them left in the box. Lydia knew she had done a good deed after all. Aside from Agrita, yesterday, she had saved the lives of many people who were destined to face death. However, despite the benefits of the bead, none of this would have happened if it weren't for Essie. Despite all her complaints, tomorrow, she will go with him to look at the clock tower, as if nothing had happened, and will definitely return from there without incident. This time, she was without a purse and did not pay any attention to her surroundings. Lydia took in the sights, calmly starting from the pedestrian walkway and right up to the outside of the square. And then, at some point, they finally reached their cherished goal. They were standing right in front of the chapel doors. Once inside, she was still being escorted to the clock tower. Nothing happened to her friends here, and they actually got there safely. Soon, our heroine finally climbed up and was able to see what she had been trying so hard for. It was self-evident like a dream. She tugged at her cheek and asked if they could go back. Now Essie asked if she really wanted to leave already. Lydia told him that she had already seen the chapel. Essie then sighed and said that if she wanted, they could come back. However, our heroine felt that something was wrong here. If everything was so easy and simple, then she felt incredibly sorry that it all happened only now. Tears started flowing involuntarily. Why work so hard for something simple? Her precious beads, to her deep regret, were already broken. The younger brother asked Lydia in surprise what had happened. Continuing to cry and wipe away her tears, the girl said that she was incredibly happy that she finally got to see the tower. It may seem surprising, but she was half honest. She didn't want to see Agrita die a third time, so she was both embarrassed and excited. Essie, at this point, said that if he had known that she would like it so much, he would have brought her here earlier. He apologized to his sister for his inattention. Lydia was so happy to see the tower that she couldn't help but feel a little sensitive. Apparently, her brother really felt sorry for her. The most important thing is to get what you want. She entered the chapel with her brother, and Agrita was still alive. Now she had to go back to the house and pack her travel bag. Now she thought that this was the last time she would feel uneasiness in this house, but unexpectedly for her plans changed. Initially, she had no intention of going to today's appointment and tried to find all sorts of excuses. When the party started, she expected to pack her things and get the hell out of there, but she felt too insecure. All because she had already witnessed the heroine's death twice, completely unexpectedly. At least she had seen her in the main hall among the guests. Either way, once Agrita and Essie meet face to face, our heroine successfully escapes from the palace. At this point, Bessie turned to the lady and told her that everything was ready so she could look in the mirror. Our heroine looked at herself and was pleasantly surprised because she looked great. Bessie was working too hard while Lydia was lost in her thoughts. The maid laughed sheepishly and said that there would be no one more beautiful than her today. Lydia said that it was true, but not including Essie. Bessie was confused and asked who she was even comparing her to, and asked her not to joke like that. However, our heroine thought that she was not joking at all. In any case, having added the final touch, the maid said that everything was ready. Soon after these words, Lydia stood up from her chair and told her maid that she had done a wonderful job. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and Bessie decided that he was already there. She immediately went up to him and opened the door, asking him to come in. Now it was time for the main character of the evening to appear, the appearance of the psychopathic villain. Our heroine noticed that he was looking at her, and also that he was quite charming. Anyway, Essie approached his sister and extended his hand, inviting her to go. Lydia extended her hand, thinking that as funny as it was the villains and psychopaths who were constantly getting love letters. Eloquent messages are sent to the house tirelessly. Excellent love letters to proposals of marriage sent by other families. Of course, Essie has never responded to these letters before and will continue to do so in the future. From now on, his attention will be exclusively on Agrita. At least you could say so, but our heroine has a small hobby. She'll burn Essie's confession along with her confessions in the fireplace anyway. Her brother wouldn't read them anyway. At first, she just helped Bessie deal with these kinds of letters, but it turned out to be more interesting than she thought. Besides, Essie seems to be enjoying her hobby. Every time she burns the messages, her mood improves. Soon the action takes us to the entrance of the hall, where the Duke and Lady were met by people who asked them to enter. After that, the door was opened, and they went inside. Finally, the main character appears at the very last moment. Anyway, with the appearance of Essie, there was always a silence which happened today. It is like the effect of the main character. Needless to say, then came the greetings to the Duke. People said that it was an honor to meet him, and they also paid compliments to Lydia and Essie. Our heroine, nevertheless, began to turn her head in different directions and look for her with her eyes. Where is the heroine? The girl thought that it would be enough for her to just look at her, and only then would she follow her. But still, Lydia continued to visually search for Agrita Grace, who was standing in the middle of the crowd of people. The first thing that caught the eye was her chestnut hair. Lydia had read this book many times, so she would recognize it without any problems. From the back, you could see how pure and piercing she was. In just a couple of seconds, our heroine finally found it. Her light chestnut hair gave her away right away. It might seem that her beauty is rather ordinary. However, her face is special, and under the curve of her eyelashes, you can see what a rare beauty she is. Our heroine understood that the book mentioned that even without makeup, Agrita looked beautiful and gentle. It sounds simple, but how can you be beautiful without trying? Looking at Agrita, Lydia realized that there were no fashionable clothes or expensive jewelry there, but the more she looked at her, the harder it was to take her eyes off her. By the way, if she can't look away, what about Essie? Where did he go? At the moment when the girl turned her head, her brother also turned his head in her direction. Suddenly, he reached out to her with his hand, and our heroine froze in shock. At that moment, he pulled out a thread sticking out of her dress and successfully notified Lydia about it. Our heroine was in incredible shock. What is he even doing? How can a thread on her dress bother him now? She saw that Agrita was over there, so why shouldn't he look in her direction? He should do it as soon as possible. Lydia seemed to be telepathically inspiring him, with the idea that he should see his destiny in Agrita's face. Nevertheless, Essie was impenetrable. Anyway, the guy noticed that his sister was looking at him strangely, so he assumed that she wanted to say something. Lydia said that everything was fine. Somehow, she couldn't understand why he wasn't looking at Agrita. What happened? She mentally asked him not to look at her, but to look at Agrita. She soon decided that if he didn't want to watch it himself, she would make him do it herself. Our heroine raised her head in horror and asked what was that thing up there. The most unexpected thing was that the usual act of attracting attention turned into her pointing out a real incident. At that very moment, the chandelier fell right on Lady Grace, and thus she died, but already before Lydia's eyes. The commotion engulfed everyone present, and our heroine thought something wrong had happened. Of course, the reception was cancelled. Of course, it was because the chandelier fell. The butler and Essie apologized to all the visitors and soon sent them home. However, only our heroine was confused and thought that something was wrong. The book kills the heroine with a chandelier. That's too much even for a murderer. It all looks like an accident, and it happened because the chandelier's fastenings came loose. However, the servant who confirmed it seemed suspicious. Lydia couldn't understand how it was possible not to check the chandelier before an event of such a scale. In addition, there are only 5 chandeliers in the banquet hall, and only one of them had a problem, and it was the one that was supposed to fall from above right on Agrita. No matter how unlucky she is, she can't be that unlucky. Nervously biting her finger, Lydia came to the conclusion that if Agrita had already died 3 times, then it was all about her fate. Apparently, she was destined to die. Our heroine saw a movie with a similar plot of her past life. The main characters were destined to die, but fortunately, they survive. However, the world does not leave it like that, and in the end, Agrita will die in accordance with her destiny. And if so, the world will continue to kill her. However, the girl began to shake her head, thinking that this should not have happened. She understood that in this case, her plans would not come true, and she could not agree with this. The world of this novel has no reason to kill its own heroine. And yet she couldn't find answers to the questions that came into her head. And by the way, her head was splitting. At that moment, Essie came up to his sister and told her that she didn't look very well, so he wanted to know if everything was okay. Hearing no response, he extended his hand to her and told her to go upstairs and rest, and he would take her there. Our heroine could do nothing but agree and extend her hand in response, so soon they were heading to her room. Although Lydia couldn't figure out what was going on yet, one thing was for sure: she needed Agrita. Entering her room, Lydia headed towards the time beads. She knew that if she turned back the day, she would probably come back and see the chapel. Now that enough time had passed, there was only an hour left before the banquet. Soon she broke the bead again. A man digs a well when he is thirsty, but what if her wish is to live? Our heroine suddenly jumped up from her seat. After a while, the action took us just when Bessie was dressing up Milady. Without saying a word, Lydia suddenly jumped up and headed for the exit. As she ran, she thought about how sorry she was that she had already used 3 beads, but she still had to try. Finally, finding Alex, the girl took him by the arm and told him that now was not the time for unnecessary questions, and immediately asked him to lower the chandelier and check it. After some time, the butler did as he was asked and began to carefully examine the chandelier. The guy soon discovered in bewilderment that there was no fastening here. He urgently ordered a new fastening to be brought here because everything had to be fixed. Having finally fixed one chandelier, he found himself thinking that he should check the other chandeliers as well. After this, the man approached Lydia and told her that it would be dangerous to leave everything like this because an accident could happen during the banquet. Anyway, he asked her how she knew. The girl said she had just had a bad dream. Soon she became thoughtful. The chandelier was fine now, but her gaze then turned to the statue, which seemed suspicious to her. What if it suddenly fell on someone? After that, she noticed a vase. The girl was wondering why they had such a big vase in the hall. Our heroine was very worried, and everything seemed extremely suspicious to her. That is why she said that she had a bad feeling. Lydia added that the dream was too ominous, and she wanted to know if they postponed the start of the banquet. Would it be possible to change the decoration and layout of the banquet hall? The man said that this could be fixed, and soon our heroine began to command the butlers, telling them to do all sorts of tasks and get rid of the decorations. Death of Agrita. If there is even a drop of uncertainty, then the problem is also inevitable. She could not ignore the threats. The girl had been driving the butler around all this time, but in doing so, she got rid of all the suspicious and dangerous things. After some time, Bessie continued to dress Lydia, and she in turn gave the last instructions. After a couple of minutes, the maid breathed a sigh of relief and told her mistress that everything was finally ready. The girl told her that she had done a great job. Now looking around, our heroine thought that there was no longer any visible danger, so she did everything she could. At this moment, the butler approached our heroine and said that the Duke would be ready soon, so she should go upstairs. The girl said that she understood and was about to head to her room, but suddenly she stopped. The butler asked in surprise what had happened. Our heroine pointed to the carpet and said that the material looked unreliable, so ladies in high heels could slip and fall. Looking at the butler, she asked him to hurry up. Of course, the man could say nothing but agree. And yet our heroine herself understood how strange and fussy all this looked in the eyes of those around her. Even those who silently followed the instructions looked embarrassed. With a heavy sigh, the girl told herself that they could think whatever they wanted. It was better than losing Agrita and then having to repair the mansion. She certainly didn't care what they thought of her. The most important thing was to prevent Agrita's death, and she had to find out what the problem was. Soon, our heroine was walking to her room and thinking that before she broke the bead, she came to the conclusion that there must be something wrong with Agrita. If it's true that the world really wants to get rid of the main character, then this world has some kind of problem, and maybe it's the heroine herself. In fact, the problem may be in both cases. It is very difficult to deal with global problems on your own. It is worth watching everything carefully. One way or another, the main character needs to be watched more closely. Our heroine must be on guard for the entire banquet. At this point, Essie turned to his sister and asked if she was nervous. The girl said in a heavy voice that she was very nervous. She thought to herself and decided that she had no reason to worry. Standing in front of the entrance, she realized that she was attending the banquet with Essie as a member of his family, but she couldn't say that it was because of Agrita. The girl suddenly smiled sweetly at her brother, telling him to tremble with delight. Today he would come of age. Essie just looked at his sister in bewilderment and remained silent. The girl did not understand why he was silent and hoped that he understood what she was talking about. Anyway, the butlers opened the doors, and soon they were back inside. Lydia thought that this time she would succeed. Entering inside, as last time all the guests began to greet the Duke and Princess Lydia. Everyone said that for them, most of them will meet them. They told them that they always looked so beautiful, as if they had come out of paintings. All the girls, by the way, shyly congratulated the Duke on his 18th birthday. The meeting looked no different from the last time, and there should not have been an accident this time. Then she turned her head and noticed Agrita, realizing that nothing had changed since Agrita had returned that day. Of course, it was impossible not to notice Essie's indifference to the heroine. But wait, is Agrita really coming to them? Is she going to come up and say hello to Essie? Does it matter when the heroine dies? At this point, Agrita's survival is paramount, so she would like to be careful, but at that moment, Alex approached her, and they discussed something with Agrita, shortly after which they bowed to each other. Right after this conversation, the girl turned around and started to leave. Our heroine just looked at her in bewilderment and did not understand where she was going. At that moment, Lydia caught herself thinking that Agrita should go out to the backyard, passing through the center of the hall. Initially, before talking about sponsorship, Essie asked her name. They almost got together, but it seems the moment was lost. Charity. Lydia wondered what was wrong with it. Agrita was going to the garden anyway, so Lydia decided to find a tree or bush to hide behind. Still, she would not like a situation to occur in which the heroine of the novel falls on a rock and dies. Originally, Essie was supposed to follow her, but looking at her brother now, Lydia wasn't sure if he would. That was why she had no choice but to follow her herself. After some time, our heroine quietly made her way to the exit, and opening the door, her eyes widened. Our heroine saw Agrita sitting in front of her, looking at the full moon. Lydia, as planned, hid behind a tree, but all this time she was thinking whether she should continue to follow or still approach. She couldn't read minds, but did that mean she could spy on Agrita? Still, she came to the conclusion that she should go and talk to her. At this point, Agrita sighed heavily and took off her shoes, saying that they were most likely made of poor material. However, she couldn't understand why her legs hurt so much if they were so expensive, or maybe it was all because of her weak body. Our heroine was perplexed. She immediately wondered if Agrita was such a person. Of course, everything she knew about the heroine of the novel she read from the book. But then again, even celebrities are different off camera. I should have stopped being afraid and just walked up to her. At this point, Agrita asked in bewilderment when she could return. She didn't have a mobile phone, so she couldn't even find her way back. Our heroine, who was eavesdropping on Agrita, was perplexed by what she had just said. Finally, making up her mind, Lydia approached Agrita and asked what mobile phone she was talking about. The girl screamed in horror and asked in bewilderment who she was and whether she had really heard everything she said. Somehow, she still knew she should answer the question, so she said it was the name of a toy she played with as a child. Our heroine whispered to Agrita whether she was from a country called Korea by any chance. The girl instantly jumped up from her seat and, grabbing Lydia by the hand, happily asked if she was also from Korea. She looked happily at our heroine and asked if she was really Korean too. Agrita was incredibly happy to see her compatriot, and in such a place, she felt lonely, but now she is much better. Then she apologized for being so energetic. She was just surprised and very happy. Our heroine, however, did not understand what was happening. There was no mention in that book that Agrita was from Korea. There was definitely no mention of that. Maybe Agrita really did remember her past life. The author might just not have said so. In any case, how would she cope with this situation? Agrita, at this moment, approached our heroine and asked how she got here. And again, the girl stopped thinking that she had started talking nonsense. But all this was because she was too happy. Agrita looked at Lydia with admiration and still asked how she got to this place because it was written about in one book. Lydia felt uneasy about these words. Was she from Korea, or was she just Korean? There were too many questions, and they were too poignant to answer. Instead of just talking about the reason for reincarnation, she should. At that moment, Agrita interrupted her thoughts. The girl happily said that she should probably tell first, before asking. Anyway, she said that she didn't have an interesting story. When she went to the dining room, she went down the stairs. However, this ladder was wet and slippery, and she was careless and accidentally slipped. Just a moment later, as soon as she opened her eyes, she was already in this place. Lydia asked in confusion if she had just been walking down the stairs, fallen, and opened her eyes here. Agrita said that was correct, and then asked if it was strange. That was what she thought too. She was in a novel she had only recently heard about. Our heroine exclaimed in surprise. Agrita asked what was wrong with her sister and then said that she would call her sister. She really did look like her sister. At some point, they woke up in an unfamiliar place and in a strange body. They are now in a fictional world, and she has become the main character. Lydia, confused, asked if she was not real. Agrita scratched her head in surprise and said that she was definitely not the real Agrita. After all, it was just the name of the owner of this body. The girl smiled and said that her name was Ari Shin Ari. Then she also asked the new guest for her name. Lydia didn't understand what was going on. However, she knew that she and Agrita had entered this world differently, and that's why our heroine said that she wasn't like Ari. The girl said that she didn't suddenly end up here. Living in Korea was her past life, but after she died, she was reborn here. Ray asked in surprise, does that mean she is from here? Does that mean she knows Korea, or rather just remembers her past life? And again, Agrita happily began to ask how it happened, because it was amazing. Our heroine, nevertheless, understood that she had nothing to add, because Agrita says everything that is on her mind. Lydia turned to Agrita, then apologized, and asked Ari when she woke up in this body. The girl thought for a moment and said that it had happened quite recently, about 4 days ago. This means that not long ago, Ari entered Agrita's body, and in the meantime, Agrita began to die in a variety of ways. What if the problem was Ari all along? In other words, because someone else has entered the main character's body, this world is trying to kill her. Shin Ari, unfortunately, has entered Agrita's body, and from a worldly perspective, she is a stranger here. Just as the human body rejects foreign bodies, this world seems to be killing Ari to get rid of her. Lydia realized every time that this was just madness. Was Agrita really going to be killed anyway? In any case, she decided that if Agrita died and Ari's soul returned to her world, then what would happen to the real protagonist? She would think she was dead, right? Ari was trying to reach our heroine all this time, asking if she was okay. Lydia, in turn, only made sure that this world is crazy. The girl suddenly turned to Ari and asked to be allowed to ask her about one thing. Ari happily agreed and said that she could ask any questions. Lydia was curious how she knew they were in a novel. Did she find the book back in Korea? The girl thought for a moment and then said that at first she knew nothing. After she woke up in this body, she wandered around the area all day. So she accidentally went into the library and looked through several books there. Thus, she learned about everything by reading one of them. The title of the book is Spring of the Goddess Agrita. Our heroine said that it is true. Well, so everything pointed to Ari being in the novel. She immediately assumed that she was the main character. The girl also said that to some extent this body has memories, and she tries very hard to pretend to be Agrita. Our heroine realized that she had decided to follow the plot using the memories of the body's owner. Now it was clear why she was present at the banquet in such a form. Anyway, Ari at that moment said that she was wondering if she would be able to return home by acting in this way. Lydia looked at this bright face in bewilderment and did not understand how she could say that she had already died 3 times. Ari, at this point, said that she wanted to know if she was doing everything right. So far, everything had gone smoothly and without problems, and she was going to try to do the same in the future. Lydia looked at her and thought of only one thing. Could she be sure that this world was killing Agrita in order to expel Ari from her body? It was the only option. To solve the problem, there was only one thing to do. They had to return Ari to her own world. But how? If the girl were to move to Korea, would Agrita be able to return to her body? She still didn't understand whether it would be better or not. Ari at this point turned to our heroine and asked if there was a pond here. Is there only a garden here? Lydia asked in surprise what a pond had to do with it. The girl told her that they had found out that they had different circumstances of movement. It was nice to meet you, but she forgot to put on her shoes in all this fuss. The girl said she should put on her shoes, but she thought she should wash her feet first. That's why she wanted to know if there was a pond around here. Our heroine assumed that he might be in the courtyard. Ari then thanked the girl and headed there. However, at that very moment, the girl remembered that she couldn't just let her go alone. Lydia ran to her, telling her that it was dangerous, and she didn't want her to go there. Ari asked in confusion if the pond was really that dangerous. Our heroine told her that it was dangerous for her. Now Ari would go there barefoot, and an ant would sting her, and ants can be poisonous. Ari, however, said that everything was fine because she was just going there to rinse her feet. She didn't understand why she had to be so careful, because even if she fell into the water, she could swim. But at that very moment, the girl slipped on the grass, which was slippery because of the water, and fell into the water. The depth of the reservoir was not that great, but for Ari, at this time, absolutely everything was dangerous. Our heroine couldn't let her die, so she took off her shoes and jumped into the water and asked Agrita to wait a minute. Lydia fortunately had learned to swim quickly, and of course, there was no one else to save Agrita. Swimming up to the girl, our heroine asked her to be calm, because everything could turn out much worse. Our heroine must have saved at least someone from drowning. When saving a drowning person, it was worth considering that he would become exhausted and eventually run out of strength. Lydia knew she had to save her, but what should she do? What was the first thing that came to mind? While thinking about how to save the girl, Lydia didn't even notice how she needed help too. However, at that very moment, someone reached out to her and grabbed her. It was like a ray of salvation. In just a moment, our heroine found herself on the ground, and now just calmly coughed. Raising her head, the girl saw Essie in front of her, who ran to her aid. Looking at his face, she assumed that he was very angry at this moment, and by the way, more than ever. Lydia, however, only coughed anxiously, and with all her might, begged her brother to help Lady Agrita. Without further ado, the guy stood up and pulled his sword out of his holster. Our heroine didn't understand what he was doing. After some time, she woke up in her bed, or rather even jumped up in horror. Almost immediately, the girl realized that she was in her bed and in her nightgown. But what about Agrita? The last thing she remembers is Essie suddenly drawing his sword and heading towards the pond. At that moment, the girl felt someone's quiet breathing and became very scared. Turning her head, she looked at her brother in bewilderment and asked him what he was doing here. The guy nevertheless put his hand on her head and pinned her to the pillow again, telling her that she should sleep some more. Lydia, of course, couldn't sleep without asking what was troubling her most. She wanted to know what had happened to Agrita. Essie told her that if his sister wanted anything, no matter what, he would do anything. However, he couldn't help but say that he was a little angry this time. Our heroine immediately clasped her hands anxiously. When she met Essie near the pond, she immediately thought that he was angry, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. The girl understood that she had made her brother worry, so she couldn't help but apologize to him. But she is his little sister, while Essie is the only one who cares, and at the same time gets angry. But still, she is not his blood sister. She is the one whom, according to the plot of the novel, he will simply kill. The girl understood that this was a completely natural future, but why did her heart feel so heavy again? If she were to ask her brother now about Agrita's well-being, he would definitely not answer her. Just at that moment, he touched his sister and, stroking her head, asked her to fall asleep quickly and wake up quickly. She would think about the rest in the morning. And finally, morning came. Our heroine, as soon as she opened her eyes, jumped up incredibly quickly. Was it all a dream? The last thing she saw was talking to Essie, but she wasn't sure if it was a dream or reality. However, she jumped out of bed again as soon as she remembered Agrita. What had happened to her? As soon as our heroine got out of bed, Ari ran straight into her arms. Lydia asked in confusion what happened. Bessie and the doctor followed her into the room and were incredibly happy that the lady had already woken up. The maid said that she was very worried, and the doctor began to follow and ask Lydia how she was feeling. Our heroine wanted to say that everything was fine, but this situation amused her. The doctor checks her pulse, and Ari is stuck to her. Agrita looked at her and, with tears in her eyes, spoke about how scared she was. Our heroine said that she understood her, and also, she was glad that she felt her warmth under her palm. Alive. Essie did save her after all? But why did he draw his sword at the last moment? Ari, who was hanging on Lydia like a teddy bear, asked her sister, what if that pond was cursed? She didn't expect to fall. Either way, she wanted to know what was wrong with him, and also that she should have listened to Lydia when she tried to warn her. The doctor suddenly said that her leg had cramped in the water, and then something had grabbed her ankle. She would not have been able to get out on her own. Ari said that she thought she would die there. Apparently, she got entangled in the seaweed, and that's why Essie took out his sword. He tried to cut the seaweed. Our heroine understood that it was somehow peaceful and altruistic. Knowing the other side of his brother, it was strange that a man who had killed several people suddenly decided to do a good deed. However, at this point, the doctor said that fortunately, the lady was all right. If it hadn't been for the Duke, by the way, Lydia would have been in trouble. Bessie echoed these words when talking about this surprise. No matter how many people fell for this trick, she wanted to know what if the lady jumped blind. Ari pressed herself even closer to her sister, telling her that it was true. It was too dangerous. Anyway, she sheepishly apologized, telling them all that it was because of her. Our heroine said one way or another that it was her decision to jump after him. Bessie was very angry about this, but the doctor, looking at her, said that they were all very worried about her. He also said that the Duke was the one who was most worried because he hadn't even really rested and had been watching her all the time. He had fallen asleep only a short time ago. A worried and serious Bessie told the lady that they would be there and that even if they asked her to come in, she would have to obey. Lydia suddenly realized that she hadn't dreamed at all. Essie had really stayed by her side all night. It meant that he was so responsive. Even though they were a family, she certainly wouldn't be able to find someone like that. Since the master and his wife passed away, many years have passed since they were left alone. Bessie approached the lady and asked her to take care of herself because they would have done the same, but still it was worth thinking about the Duke as well. The maid held Lydia's hands and said that the Duke really cared about her. The girl felt that Bessie's voice was soft and sincere, but it sounded ironic. After listening to their sincere request, she realized even more clearly why she would have to die. Essie, who doesn't value others, is the only one who can give a heart, and he only has a sister left. But still, in turn, the guy also thinks that his sister is the only and special person for him, and without a doubt, she gives her love. However, how would he feel when he found out it was all a lie? She assumed that he would never let her live. Anyway, at that moment, the doctor approached Bessie and, pushing her a little, asked her to stop making things up. He told her that the lady had not fallen into the pond on purpose, but she continued to grumble. Bessie, puzzled, asked him if he should pick on her now. The doctor asked in confusion what it was, if not grumbling. Bessie was already very angry, but at that moment Lydia intervened and asked them not to argue. She stood between them and reminded them that she was fine, so there was no point in arguing. She was fine, and Bessie was right. She would be careful in the future. Immediately after this, Bessie's face changed, and she happily said that if the lady was already awake, then she should definitely wash herself, so she would bring hot water. Lydia agreed, but said that cold water would be fine for her. The doctor suddenly gave her advice. She could easily fill the bathtub with water, and by the way, not only cold water. Bessie headed towards the exit anyway, and told them to just wait until the water heated up. In that case, the doctor also said that he would go, and if the lady felt unwell, she could call him at any time. And by the way, he asked her not to do any self-diagnosis, and also not to perceive it as something trivial and not particularly important. It is dangerous. As soon as everyone left, our heroine turned her head and noticed Ari on the bed, which definitely made it clear that she wanted to stay next to Lydia. Nevertheless, our heroine smiled at her and, opening the door, said that they would see each other later in the dining room, which of course meant a request to leave. Still, Ari left, and now having closed the door behind everyone, the girl decided that she could rest a little and be alone with herself. And again, a shiver ran through our heroine's body because she began to think about Ari. Will everything be okay with her? She immediately opened the door to investigate who had come to see her, so she carefully stuck her head out of the doorway. In the corridor, she saw a butler who was asking the lady if everything was all right with her. The girl told him that she was fine, but at that moment his face changed in an instant. He immediately asked why she jumped into the water. He wondered if she really thought you couldn't drown in a pond. Also that you couldn't take it so lightly, blah blah blah, and a huge storm of lectures. Lydia couldn't even get a word in, and knew that this was real grumbling. By the way, her head was hurting a lot, so she wanted to be left alone. After that, the butler just grumbled, non-stop. Our heroine literally couldn't stand it all, so she ran out of the room. Afterwards, the Grace family paid them a visit, and together they thanked the Whitgreen family for saving their daughter. Lydia was even embarrassed by this, so she said that everything was fine, so there was no need to thank her. However, looking back, it was kind of funny. She could still feel the cold water, and Essie was the one who saved Agrita. Anyway, Agrita's parents thanked them endlessly, and soon left, and they arrived right after she woke up. What madness! Finally, sitting down on the sofa, our heroine decided that she needed to collect her thoughts. In any case, Agrita is now unconditionally doomed to die, but who kills her? The world. And why? Because this is not the real Agrita. This is not the real protagonist of the novel. How much Shinari has entered Agrita's body. Now the world is trying to kill her to get her out of here. Just think, a 10-star holiday party. Secondly, our heroine was interested in whether it was possible to save Agrita, who was destined to die. It was probably possible, but she is far from being able to save Agrita. Lydia actually accompanies her on her way to the underworld. In other words, she definitely couldn't cope alone, so she needed help, but she was still really glad that she could be saved. Lydia mentally turned to the current Agrita, or rather even to Ari, and asked her for help. She would like to confess to her everything that has accumulated in her heart, but nevertheless the problem is that she is not sure of her feelings. All she needs is for Agrita to attract Essie's attention, and all this in order to safely leave the mansion. There is another problem. However, Essie was attracted to Agrita only because she was Agrita. Now that she was no longer the real Agrita, Ari had no idea what would happen next. And in general, our heroine doubted Essie was next to her while she slept, which means he sat next to her all night. If everything went according to the plot, Essie would have seen Agrita and fallen in love with her at first sight. Thus, Essie would have stayed with Agrita last night, not with her. Everything was too ambiguous, and it really upset our heroine. Anyway, she decided to think positively. The only thing she could count on now was Agrita. Without her, she will die without accomplishing her goal. She is truly afraid of dying during the escape, and besides, Essie is not someone to fall in love with. However, despite the fact that the events differ from the plot of the book, Essie still saved Agrita. Even if it is not love at first sight, there is still hope. In that case, there is only one thing left for her. Now, just at that moment, Bessie came into the room and asked how things were. She offered to bring something to eat. Bessie asked if she should have some food brought to her room. Lydia smiled and asked the maid to set the table in the dining room, and she would eat there. Already on her way to the dining room, our heroine thought that she needed to tell Ari everything she needed to know why she was getting into trouble. She's in the dark now, but they can at least avoid anything that might pose a danger to her. The only question was how to make her believe her. That was the hardest question. At that moment, our heroine was pulled out of her thoughts by the joyful cries of Ari, who was calling her sister and saying that she was here. The butler asked Milady to forgive him, but still, when communicating with aristocrats, it is customary to speak more respectfully. Ari looked at him in bewilderment. Lydia thought that this butler only allowed this towards her, but he didn't care who he lectured. Suddenly, our heroine noticed some unknown flying object near the butler. "What is this?" After looking a little closer, the girl screamed in horror, saying that there was a bee in the building. The maid cried out in horror, and the other began waving her hand, bewildered that they were here again. However, our heroine understood that there was nothing surprising in a simple flying bee, because it could have simply flown in from the front yard garden or across the road. At that moment, the girl thought about it, and a moment later, she screamed in bewilderment, asking to catch her because she was poisonous. She began to rush the maids and butlers, saying that they should hurry because if they were bitten, they would die on the spot. This bee looked like a normal bee, so everyone was confused. But Lydia can be sure, if there is a bee near Ari, then there is definitely something wrong with it. Lydia knew that she should also take on the task of catching the bee, so she should stand closer to Ari. She can't touch anything poisonous, so she needs to think of something to catch the bee with. However, at that moment, a bee began to fly towards Ari, so the girl fell into a stupor and only screamed in horror. Soon, there was a loud bang, after which a chopped-up bee fell to the ground. The unknown guy stepped onto the floor and apologized to the miss, saying that he barely made it in time. The boy apologized for the delay, but once he returned, he did not leave his duty for a moment. He was ordered to accompany her. He introduced himself as Darbury, a loyal knight of the family. "This is the accompanying knight of the Whitgreen family." Then he smiled and said that he had overslept. Darbury asked not to tell the gentleman about it. After that, he asked what his punishment would be. After all, he deserved it, or at least he thought he should have deserved it. Our heroine, seeing him almost with tears in her eyes and with great bewilderment, greeted him. A maid came up to him, saying that she didn't even know he was there. Still, the knight's skills were still good, since he was able to cut down such a small bee. By the way, about the bee, the butler asked in bewilderment whether it was really poisonous. As soon as Darbury heard this, he even cried out, asking how this could happen. The doctor, who had just arrived, was also very surprised, so he wanted to take a closer look at the bee. The man suddenly asked in horror where it had come from. He confirmed that this bee is very toxic. They were lucky to meet such a rare and poisonous insect. He explained that if she had literally stung him, he would definitely not have survived. Anyway, he asked if everyone was alive and well. Lydia confirmed his words and said that everything was relatively fine. Although one way or another, Ari almost died, and right now she was scared to death. Our heroine was asked how she even found out this information, because if it weren't for Lady and Sir Darbury, everything could have ended very badly. Lydia, however, did not answer the question, and only turned to Agrita, saying that she needed to talk to her for a short time. After a while they were already walking, but our heroine was so shocked that she simply could not find words. Only yesterday she almost died from drowning, and today from a bee sting. Although the girl understood that this was also a good opportunity for her, if she told everything now, Ari should be more willing to believe her. At this moment, Darbury appeared behind them, who said that it was poison at first glance. The bee looked normal, but in the future, he asked to immediately kill the bees in the mansion. Our heroine was scared to imagine how long he would follow them. Lydia suddenly turned around and addressed the accompanying knight. The guy asked in surprise how he could serve. Our heroine explained to him that she had something to talk about with Lady Agrita, so she asked him to wait for them outside the door. Darbury nevertheless said a confident no. He explained that he had been given orders not to leave them for a second. Lydia told him that the topic of their conversation was very important. In that case, the guy said they could hit him if he told anyone Lydia had completely forgotten about Sir Darbury's excessive dodginess. Unfortunately, our heroine was completely powerless against Essie's order. Why did he give this order? Lydia still screamed in confusion and said that it was no longer possible to talk calmly in her own mansion. Darbury said that he would cover his ears. Our heroine couldn't believe that she was going to say such a thing, but at that moment she asked in surprise if it was true that he would still hear everything with his ears closed. Lydia still didn't want to do it, but then she asked him what he thought would happen to him for disobeying her. The girl said she would tell Essie everything. Something like, because of Sir Darby's carelessness she almost died. The guy screamed in bewilderment, and our heroine asked him if he could live to see the sunrise after such words. It would be nice to see the moon too. Darby immediately started asking her to wait a minute because it was all a lie. There was no excuse for being late, but he himself almost got stung. Lydia waved her hand and asked him what difference it made. Who would Essie most likely believe? Now Darby knew he had nothing to counter with. Finally, our heroine said that she likes talented people like him, so she hopes that he will continue to serve for the benefit of their family for a long time. Soon the girls closed the door behind them, and Darby was left outside. Lydia mentally asked him for forgiveness and asked him to understand because people's lives depended on it. At this point, the girls sat down at the table. Our heroine suggested to Ari that if she was hungry, she should first have a snack and then talk. The girl told her that she didn't want to because she wanted to eat, but for some reason her appetite had completely disappeared. Ari tried to calmly take the cup of water and drink it without saying a word. However, she immediately slammed her down on the table and asked in bewilderment how the bee could be poisonous. It couldn't be that dangerous. She soon began to scream and talk about her bewilderment because she almost died. Lydia only smiled sweetly, realizing that what she had been waiting for had finally begun. However, her reasoning continued for a long time. Lydia could not find a moment to intervene in the conversation. At this point, Ari said that if she thought about it, she had also had some strange bad luck at the pond yesterday. She suggested that it might be some kind of curse, or that it wasn't the pond, but actually the mansion. She immediately apologized for her crude speculations. Lydia was happy because she said it very well. The girl told her that everything was right. But again, Ari interrupted her, apologizing for her behavior. She remembered that Lydia wanted to tell her something, but nevertheless, she said that she was much younger than Lydia. The girl said that she was 17. Our heroine, having heard this number, was incredibly shocked. Agrita continued saying that according to local reckoning, it was 16, or rather 15, since she was born in winter. Our heroine was perplexed. She couldn't believe it was true. How could she be only 15 years old? Ari suddenly said that she slipped on the stairs at school, and it seemed to be the day of the mock exam. After taking the test, she was too nervous. So because of all this, and because of her haste, she was too careless, and an accident happened. Anyway, she apologized again, saying that her sister wanted to talk to her about something. However, Lydia was already in shock at being only 15. The words she should have uttered just a moment ago were now stuck in her throat. She was destined to die, and if she wanted to avoid her fate, she had to be extremely careful. Before she realized the situation, Lydia tried to save her in every way possible because she needed her. Ari turned to her sister and asked if everything was okay. Our heroine had to save Agrita for her own future, and yet she had to say it. The girl continued to call her sister, and Lydia, in turn, bit her lip, collecting her thoughts. Still gathering her will into a fist, she turned to the girl and asked if she wanted to live. Ari asked again, in bewilderment, and our heroine asked her to choose. After some time, our heroine was walking down the corridor feeling very depressed. At that moment, Sir Darby approached her and covered her with his hand because Lydia was walking straight into the wall. He told her, puzzled, that he didn't want to die, so if she was angry, she should have used words. The girl at that moment only slowly turned her head towards Darby and did not say a word. In the same way, she silently turned around and headed straight again so that he wouldn't bother her with his questions. Our heroine told Agrita about the situation she was in, but not in order to continue saving her. Lydia said that if she died, her soul might return to its original world. Still, she didn't know how realistic it was, but it was up to her to decide whether to take advantage of this opportunity. Now the choice was hers. If she wanted to go against the will of this world and fight for life, she would help her. But if she decided to give up, She promised not to interfere. The girl hit herself on the head in bewilderment, telling herself that she had gone crazy. She's the type who doesn't care about others. So when did she become so conscientious? She was so rational, even when she stole beads. However, once she met Ari, she could not bear the surge of guilt and remorse. Her confidence that she had to keep her alive, for the sake of her plan, simply disappeared. She knew she was weak when it came to children. She silently screamed and said that it was possible to go crazy like that. Now her future depended on Agrita's decision. She would lose the opportunity to change her future if Ari decided to accept death. After saying goodbye to her, she would have to prepare for a dark and tragic end. One way or another, she had started this whole mess herself, so she had no one to blame. At this point, Bessie approached our heroine and handed her some honey water. She was going to take it to the Duke's bedroom so that he could drink it when he woke up. The maid asked to fulfill this request for her and take this water to the Duke. Lydia asked her again, in bewilderment. Bessie, however, smiled sweetly and said that in that case, they would see each other at the same time. Lydia knew that her brother was sleeping now, so why would she visit a sleeping man? At that moment, Darberry turned to her and said that she could entrust this matter to him. Our heroine declined his offer, saying that everything was fine. In any case, because of her, he did not sleep all night. By the way, the girl didn't even remember the last time she entered Essie's room, much less after her parents' death. Having already approached the Duke's room, although she understood that he was sleeping for the sake of decency, she decided to knock. At that moment, a voice came from inside the room, asking the girl to come in. What? Was he really not sleeping? Entering the room, she saw her brother in front of her, who was sitting at the table and looking at documents. Soon he raised his head, and noticing his sister, asked in surprise why she had come. Did she really have some business for him? The girl quickly handed him the water, saying that she had come to give him something. To be more precise, this honey water. Essie asked in surprise why Bessie had asked someone to bring it and only caused herself trouble. Soon he put the water aside. It seems he is not going to drink it. Then he asked his sister how she was feeling. The girl said that everything was fine. She was healthy, and her body was light, and she was sleeping well. Essie was glad to hear that. However, our heroine noticed his intense gaze, which made it clear that he himself was wondering whether she was telling the truth. In any case, the girl decided that she should change the subject, so she asked her brother what about him, because she heard that he had not rested all night. She thought that he must be sleeping now. But then why was he sitting there all busy? Essie explained that if he worked in the office, the butler would bother him. Our heroine, although she understood what he was talking about, was still not interested in that. She wanted to know if he was tired. Essie, at this point, told his sister that he was not at all so tired that he wanted to sleep. Lydia asked in surprise if he was not tired. However, she also saw that he looked quite cheerful, but he said that he had not slept at all. At that moment, Essie reached out to his sister and, adjusting a lock of her hair, suggested that it was windy outside. Lydia jumped up in horror. He scared her too much, and in the end, he just fixed her hair. But by the way, about her hair, she never went out, and the reason for her disheveled hair was when she was terrified and furious. She immediately realized, with horror, that she had been walking around with shaggy hair all the time, which meant that Sir Darby could at least have told her about it. He really only does security. Lydia decided to talk about the weather, but suddenly she stopped and asked her brother in bewilderment why he was lying to her. Essie asked again in bewilderment. The girl told him that he says he is not tired, but this is not true, because he speaks much slower than usual. As a child, Essie also spoke more slowly when he was tired. Of course, it is not so easy to understand, but she easily recognized her brother's mood even then. He himself has grown up, but what is surprising is that he still has the same habit as in childhood. Even a psychopathic villain has a sweet side. The boy asked his sister how she understood it, because he thought it was not so noticeable. The girl told him that as soon as she listens to him, it immediately becomes clear. However, Essie smiled sweetly and said that only she knew about this side of him. Anyway, the guy said he wasn't lying. It wasn't that he wasn't tired, he just wasn't tired enough to fall asleep. Our heroine, nevertheless, pointed out that he said that he had not rested at all at night. The guy answered her that everything was fine, so there was no need to worry. One way or another, he understood that she couldn't help but worry, so he nevertheless took the glass in his hands and drank all the contents. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and asked if his throat was really dry. He literally drank it all at once. Essie laughed and told his sister that this sometimes happens when you are very thirsty. Lydia looked at him in bewilderment and wondered if he had caught a cold. When you're sick, your throat suddenly becomes dry. Anyway, the girl said that he hadn't slept all night, which is why his throat was now dry. Even though he assured her that he was fine, his condition still spoke volumes about the opposite. At that moment, the guy turned to his sister and asked her directly if she liked a Greta Grace. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he meant, so she decided to ask. The boy smiled sweetly as he looked at his sister and soon asked her if he should make a doll out of her. The girl immediately screamed, telling him that it was out of the question. Essie asked why, and Lydia was shocked that he was even asking that. He explained to her that it would be more comfortable this way and that she would not be able to move at will, so she would not fall into the pond again. In that case, he won't jump after her either. His face was strangely distorted by these words. Our heroine instantly caught herself thinking that her brother was probably scolding her for jumping into the water. At this point, Essie started to stand up and tell his sister that she could do whatever she wanted and he was not going to interfere. Soon he approached her and added that if something happened to her, he would not leave the others alone. Finally, he added that this was all she needed to know. Our heroine now understood that he would kill someone if she got hurt. The girl, nevertheless, decided to clarify and ask who he meant by the word, the rest. The guy explained to her that by this he meant everyone except her, of course. After some time, our heroine left the Duke's office. Darbury immediately approached Lydia and asked the lady if she had passed the honey water. Looking at Sir Darbury with bitterness, she whispered that this was another life, depending on her. The guy asked again, in bewilderment. Our heroine said that everything was fine, but Essie's voice was still ringing in her head. She had some thoughts once. What if she was Essie's real older sister? Could she say with a smile on her face that her brother was just a bit of an impulsive person? Could she truly rejoice at all the excessive care from her brother every time he singles her out and addresses her differently? Like this time, she has no choice but to put herself in the shoes of people who are strangers to him. It's because this is her true place. She may still be part of this family, but sooner or later they'll get rid of her. They'll accuse her of pretending to be something she's not. Our heroine understood that the price for this was something other than death. At that moment, Darbury turned to the girl and asked her in surprise why she had stopped. The girl understood that there was no point in delving into such dark thoughts, so she decided to ask Darbury what family relationships meant to him. The girl asked how much his family meant to him. At that moment, the guy thoughtfully said that he had no family. Lydia was in shock. Our heroine forgot that Sir Darbury was once an orphan and wandered through the back streets, and Essie in turn recognized his talent and brought him along. The girl immediately began to apologize, saying that she didn't say it on purpose because she was just curious about what other people thought about it. Darbury smiled and said he would answer her later when he got married and started a family. Lydia told him not to go that far. Lydia, however, was already feeling too uncomfortable. Darbury suddenly said that if he had a younger sister, he would always protect her. Our heroine asked again. In surprise, Sir Darbury said that he would most likely fulfill all his sister's whims within his capabilities, of course, if she did not wish for his death. Lydia suddenly asked why he would protect his younger sister. The guy said that he wouldn't consider his younger brother cute. And by the way, he said that this also applies to his older brother, but he should think about his older sister. Lydia decided that she had heard biased and discriminatory statements. Darbury asked, anyway, what was wrong since they didn't exist? Anyway, Lydia then asked why he thought his little sister was cute. just because she was his sister? The guy said that first of all, since she is his sister, it means that she looks like him and that she is very beautiful. Soon he began to tell her a million factors and character traits that would suit her sister. She would be perfect in many ways. Our heroine asked in bewilderment if all this was really his fantasy. Darbury asked the lady in surprise what fantasy he was talking about. The guy said he waited for someone to ask him about it and kept these thoughts in his heart. He can't tell. He wants to, but then everyone will know his weaknesses. Still, he read that it was unfair because he had described a very real image of his sister based on existing factors. Lydia tried to interrupt him. She held up an imaginary object, saying that she had found something on the floor of the mansion earlier and that it seemed to be his conscience. Darbury laughed and said that couldn't be true. Then our heroine asked if it could be his shame. The guy smiled and said that he didn't know whose it was, but that person was so confused. Lydia even forgot about him for a while because she hadn't seen him for almost a year, but still, Darbury really is that kind of person. At this point, Darbury interrupted her and asked what about her. He wondered how important family was to her. Our heroine immediately thought about it, because if you think about it, she is also an orphan. She has no blood relatives in this mansion. Even if her real family does exist somewhere, she will never know about it. Realizing that she couldn't say anything better than that her family was as important to her as heaven and earth, Darbury asked in surprise if that was really the answer. He then said that although he didn't have a younger sister, he still had someone who replaced her. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and hoped that this was not a declaration of love. Most likely he simply considered her his younger sister. However, she didn't know what to answer him, so she decided to tell him that someday she would find out about his feelings, so he should hold on. Out of curiosity, she decided to ask what kind of person she was. Sir Darbury said that everything he had said above was very much in keeping with her description. Our heroine, perplexed, assumed that he was talking about that same imaginary younger sister. Does she exist? Darbury was perplexed and said that she was not imaginary, but a real person. Our heroine sighed and said that she had not said anything like that. Anyway, they reached the ladies' room. Lydia suddenly asked if he would follow her into the room because of his order. The guy said that the exception was places with guaranteed security or personal use, so he would not enter. Our heroine suggested that in that case, while she was in the room, he could rest. Darbury immediately thought about it because he hadn't thought about it. Lydia understood what his workload meant, so she told him to rest, and if she was going to go out somewhere, she would definitely call him. After some time, our heroine entered her room and happily lay down on her comfortable bed. Also, while she was lying and enjoying the comfortable bed, she remembered that she needed to unpack all her things. However, she also caught herself thinking that she didn't want to move at all. The reason she returned to the room was because she needed to unpack the suitcase hidden in the closet and tidy up. She originally wanted to take him with her when she was about to escape, but the situation has changed a bit, and it won't be possible to do that right now. In that case, she decided that she could rest a little and then get down to her business. After some time, one of the maids woke the lady Lydia, not even realizing how much time had passed, asked in bewilderment what had happened. The maid told her that Lady Agrita Grace wanted to meet her, so she asked to call her. Soon, Lydia was heading towards her. When they parted ways with Agrita, the worst thoughts had entered her mind. She was worried that Ari would kill this damned world. Yet fortunately, this did not happen. So she thought that Agrita had made a decision to live or die, and that Lydia's fate would also depend on this choice. At this point, Ari turned to our heroine and asked her if she thought she was dead. Our heroine asked her again, puzzled. The girl said that she was not talking about Agrita Grace, but about the real her. Did she really die after slipping on the stairs? After our heroine's story, she thought a lot. She said that after death, her soul can return to the original world. If that's really the case, then doesn't that mean she died in the original world, and that's why her soul ended up here? The stairs were too high. The girl started crying, saying that she didn't want to think about it, But was she really dead? She was only 17. She had so many plans. Ari said that she didn't even pass the entrance exams and didn't get in. In any case, she didn't want to die. Our heroine was incredibly depressed, but in response to Ari's words, she only mentally agreed with her. After her birth here, she remembered her past life. Somehow, this life felt like a foggy past. If she were in the same situation, she would feel the same way. A time when there are still many things you haven't done. The time when you look forward to your future life, more than you reminisce about the days you've already lived. A wonderful age, to say the least. Ari was too young to cope with the sudden death that had befallen her, so Lydia silently embraced Agrita. Our heroine continued to comfort her in her arms for a long time, but rather not Agrita, but the crying 17-year-old Shin Ari, who did not want to die. After some time, the girl wiped away all her tears, and by that time, she had already told everything. Lydia soon told the girl that she relied on her. Ari, in a calmer voice, said that she hoped too. The girl decided to continue living as Agrita. In this situation, she really had no other choice. Even if she came back, there was a high probability that her body was dead. Our heroine decided to help her survive, and she, in turn, decided to help her escape. Ari, at this point, said in surprise that she really didn't understand. Lydia asked what happened. The girl screamed in horror and asked how it was possible to kill such a kind and sweet person as Lydia, bad villain. Our heroine just smiled sweetly at her and said that she was undoubtedly right. Ari, however, said that she will do everything possible to escape safely. She will charm the villain with her skillful seduction skills. Our heroine nevertheless wondered if Ari would be able to take advantage of this. They had a bigger problem, and even if they used it, would their plan work? Essie's indifferent voice suddenly sounded in her head, suggesting that she make a doll out of Agrita, and he didn't waver for a second. She understood that the way he had followed Ari to help her last night, the way he had saved her from drowning without hesitation, without saying a word, she saw hope in those actions. But this is just useless optimism, because Essie is actually indifferent. Our heroine tried to control herself, but at that moment, she only sighed heavily. It was a well-known fact that Agrita was beautiful white skin, with a peachy red blush and neat features. Her slender frame makes you want to take her under your protection, as well as her long and smooth hair with her clear and sparkling eyes. She is elegant and pure innocent. Her attractive appearance once seen is definitely hard to forget. Looking at the mug of tea, our heroine wondered how she could use all this. After all, Essie needed to figure it all out himself. However, Essie does not look at a person's appearance. His lack of interest in other people means he is not interested in their appearance. He never showed any interest in either beauties or those who were not. Instead, regardless of their appearance, he treated everyone equally. This seems to have been one of the factors that increased Essie's popularity among girls. People probably find it very attractive not to judge others by their appearance. Lydia needed another way to get Essie's attention. What could she come up with? One way or another, our heroine approached Ari and suggested that she try. The girl happily agreed. Lydia was very happy that Ari had recovered so quickly from everything that had happened. She actively supported her offer of mutual assistance. Only thanks to this, our heroine will be able to at least try to survive. If not for Ari, who would she tell about her future, and with whom would she discuss what to do next? But there is something more important than seduction. This and everything else is possible only if Ari stays alive. Their task was to rewrite the unfortunate fate. Our heroine asked Ari not to leave her side for a single step today, and to follow her. The girl happily agreed. Lydia had to check something, but for this, Ari would have to face danger a couple more times, but she couldn't let her suffer. Having put Ari's life in danger, we need to help this girl survive, and for that we definitely need Sir Darbury. After some time, a vase fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Perplexed cries followed. The maid was perplexed and said that she didn't know how it happened. In any case, she apologized, saying that she was truly sorry. Darbury told her that everything was fine because no one was hurt, so she didn't have to keep apologizing so much. This was to be expected from Sir Darbury. Just now, a flower pot almost fell on Ari's head, but the knight saved her, and now the clock shows 15 minutes past 12. Our heroine approached Ari and asked her if everything was okay. The girl said that she was fine. She then turned to Darbury and thanked him for saving her. The guy said that everything was fine. Lydia, however, noticed that they both looked scared. Anticipating danger and facing it head-on are two different things. Fortunately, Sir Darbury had already saved Ari's life twice that day. At that moment, the guy went to the maids, and our heroine decided that she needed to take advantage of the opportunity while he was gone. Our heroine immediately turned to Ari and asked him to listen carefully. The time when her life is in danger comes 3 times a day. Our heroine assumed that this happens in the morning, lunch, and evening. The first death was in the chapel in the morning, and also a death from an explosion in the center. In the third case, a chandelier fell, and in the fourth case, there was an incident with a pond in the evening. By the way, this was the 5th time there was a case with a poisonous bee in the morning, and the last time just now was a flower pot that fell at lunchtime. So they have this information, midnight dawn, between morning and lunch, or between lunch and dinner. She was never in danger at this time. Ah, Ree exclaimed in disbelief. Saying that it was true, Lydia said that if her suspicions were confirmed, her situation should be much better. However, just in case our heroine still asked not to leave her side today, we need to look before dinner to make sure of this for sure. At that moment, the girls heard strange screams behind them, so they turned around to find out what it was. Eventually, they noticed the maid who knelt down to apologize, and Darbury, who assured her that everything was fine. Both our heroine and Ari decided to approach the tearful maid to tell her that everything was fine. The action shifts to evening. During Essie's 4-day coming-of-age ceremony and birthday banquet, today was the 2nd day of celebration. Our heroine had completely forgotten about this because she had spent all her time with Agrita without leaving her side. But Bessie came, and she was suddenly overtaken by preening. After a while, the maid's work was completed, and Lydia once again appeared in a chic image that emphasized her beauty. Ari, as soon as she saw her little sister, began to talk with delight on her face about how beautiful she was. Our heroine nevertheless decided to say that Agrita is also very beautiful, although this is a well-known fact. Even though she lent Ari her clothes because she had to stay here all day, they still suited her very well. The girl suddenly turned to Sir Darbury and asked if he thought the same. The guy thought for a moment and then said a hesitant yes. Lydia immediately told him that there was no sincerity in his answer. After playing with all his might, the boy fell to his knees, saying that they were both dazzling, that it was difficult for him to even look at them because he did not want to be dazzled. After a while, our heroine thought about it. Although she had assumed, it seemed that Essie had not yet come down to the banquet hall. If he was going to attend, he would have arrived early to accompany Lydia. So there was a high probability that he would not show up here. Usually, if the celebration lasted several days, he would simply appear on the first day. According to the book, he was supposed to be present today to show interest in Agrita, but now it seems we can ignore what the book says altogether. According to the plot, he would have gotten rid of the 2 young men who invited Agrita to dance. Although it would be funny if Essie followed the plot of the book when everything went wrong from the very beginning. By the way, it was now 6:30. Nothing had happened since the incident with the flower pot at lunchtime. The girl understood that the time was slowly approaching for a new threat to Ari's life. So what danger could await her? She removed from the banquet hall everything that could pose a threat to her life. Ree will not go outside now either to take risks like she did yesterday. Suddenly, a stranger approached and bowed down, telling the lady that she was as dazzling as ever. Our heroine was of course very happy to hear this, but she asked him in bewilderment who he was. An awkward silence ensued. The guy said that he had introduced himself to her last time, but it seemed that she did not remember him. He was the eldest son of Count Kami, Riga Kami. It was a great honor for him to meet her. Our heroine said with embarrassment that she was also glad to see Mr. Kami. The guy, however, said with surprise that for some reason the Duke was not visible today. Lydia smiled and said that that was all because Essie was still busy with his own affairs. Riga suggested that being the head of a family is not an easy task. Even for him, the training alone is tiring for successors. Our heroine didn't really understand who it was, and most likely she won't remember him even the next time. At that moment, the guy offered her a glass of wine. Lydia extended her hand towards him, saying that she was grateful to him for his courtship, so she would agree. At that very moment, a loud cry was heard, which ordered not to drink this wine. Soon the glass fell and broke. The guy turned around in bewilderment and noticed Lady Danda in front of him. Anyway, Riga looked at her and asked what she was doing. The girl looked at him angrily and asked if it was right to ask what she was doing. Pointing at him, she asked him what he was going to do in turn. She knows that he put poison in that glass of wine. Riga asked in confusion what she was talking about, and the girl said that using the same method as last time, he decided to shamelessly behave here as if nothing had happened. Riga, nevertheless, explained that it was a misunderstanding. He was just helping a drunk girl at a banquet, and she misunderstood everything. So why do this to him now? Danda was furious and said that all this was absurd because he had added poison to the wine. Riga said, in surprise, that his mistake was not knowing that the girl did not tolerate alcohol well and allowing her to abuse it. But what poison were we talking about? The guy said he understood that it was Lady Dianda's friend, but her accusation was unfair. Our heroine did not understand what was happening, but it was hard to tell from his face that he was lying. One way or another, she understood that time was slowly approaching, and it was a little. At this point, Darby intervened to help in the conversation, asking the lady to ask him something. The guy looked at her and asked if she knew what they put in it. Danda said she didn't know what it was called and only knew the effect after using it. The body weakens and memory is partially lost. If she had not found her friend in time, it is scary to imagine what she could have gotten into. Thus, she insisted that everything Riga had said was a blatant lie. Riga screamed in bewilderment, and Darby asked them to calm down. Sir Darby decided to do what he thought was right, so he decided to ask for help. After some time, Essie came down to the banquet hall. Our heroine was shocked that by call for help, the knight meant calling Essie. Either way, she didn't understand who was standing behind him. Why did he bring some guys with him? Essie first approached his sister and asked how she was feeling. Lydia told him that everything was fine. Essie then said that he had already been informed of everything. Darby apologized for disturbing the Duke and causing him inconvenience. The guy said it wasn't his fault. Meanwhile, Lydia was still wondering who all these people were. Just at that moment, Riga turned around and was stunned. He definitely knew these people. At this time, these guys said that they did not know what was going on, but they still apologized for being wrong and asked for mercy. Essie asked them to calm down because he just wanted to ask them something. Do they remember all the types of substances sold and their buyers? Our heroine looked at him in surprise. What was going on now? What sold substances were we talking about? And what buyers? Darby, at this point, seemed to have figured out what the lady was thinking. So he said that all these people were drug dealers who were currently working. Essie, meanwhile, came even closer to them and asked if they remembered the man with whom they had made a deal about a week ago. They raised their hand in horror and pointed forward, saying that the man who bought the drug from him a week ago was this gentleman. The finger pointed at Riga. The guy even fell to the ground from such statements, and Essie asked what kind of drug it was and its effect. The merchant said it was colorless and odorless, slightly bitter. If you add it to alcohol, you can barely taste it. Also, after a certain time, the body temperature rises and the strength leaves him. The next day after taking it, the person loses memory. Our heroine listened to all this and realized with horror that this lady was telling the truth. Riga, at this point, screamed in confusion and asked if they had any proof. Even if he had bought poison from this merchant, where was the proof that it was in the glass? He argued that he bought the poison on request, but he didn't use it, so he wasn't guilty of anything. For a guy who tried to escape, he still has a lot of confidence. At this point, Essie asked the merchant if he could tell the difference between the drink that had the substance added to it. The man, surprised, said that he could. The Duke asked what if the poison had been added in small quantities. The merchant answered him that it was possible because she had dealt with it herself. Noticing the Duke's intense gaze, the boy understood what he wanted from him, so he crawled towards the broken glass. The boy soon took a small amount of wine on his finger and licked it. Soon he thought for a while. A few seconds later, he said that it was definitely a love potion. Essie asked him again in confusion. The ladies began to whisper, saying that they had heard about it. They even thought of buying it, but they did not know that it would be such a drug. Our heroine was surprised that such a convenient thing actually exists. If there was a medicine that would force a person to fall in love, then she would. At that very moment, a brilliant idea came into our heroine's head, which even made her fall into a stupor. People around noticed that Lydia's behavior had changed, so they asked in confusion if everything was okay. Our heroine suddenly came to her senses and, clearing her throat, said that she was fine. At that moment, a loud female scream was heard behind her. Turning her head, Lydia was horrified to discover that the source of the scream was Agrita and that there was a dagger at her neck. People asked Mr. Riga in confusion what he was doing. The guy, however, said that he did not think that everything would turn out like this. He turned to His Excellency and said that he wished only one thing he wanted, that today's incident would not affect him and his family in any way. It was funny that there were so many witnesses here, and this fool decided to take a man hostage. Lydia knew he was cornered now, but she wanted to know why he chose to grab Ari. Our heroine then looked at Darbury and asked him in bewilderment where he had been and why he had not protected Lady Agrita. The guy, of course, first of all, protected Lydia. Our heroine understood all the circumstances, but still persisted. Meanwhile, Riga hurried the Duke, telling him to give his word quickly, and then he would release the lady. Lydia knew that if this continued, he would pretend to draw a knife. He might mistakenly draw a knife for real and kill Ari. Our heroine was curious about the danger that could threaten her, but she did not want to find out about it this way. Essie suddenly asked if he should save the lady. Our heroine asked again. In bewilderment, Essie asked his sister if he should save the hostage. The girl in bewilderment said yes. In the blink of an eye, the Duke lunged and slammed Riga's wrist with all his might. The boy immediately fell to the ground and began to groan in pain. Our heroine looked into her brother's eyes in bewilderment and was shocked by his speed because she didn't even see anything. Anyway, at that moment, a pale Ari ran up to Lydia in horror and hugged her, asking if she had survived. At this time, Essie asked the guards to hand this man over to his family, and later he would personally deal with his crimes. Our heroine continued to hug Agrita, but she also understood that it would be noisy for a while now. At that moment, Darbury approached her and asked her to first move to another place, since they also needed to clean up the shards from the broken glass. Our heroine agreed, but at that moment she remembered something thanks to Riga. Although it certainly wasn't a love potion, it could have helped her win Essie's heart. After some time, our heroine turned to Darbury in surprise and asked him if it was really worth going that far. Now briefly about what happened in the banquet hall some time ago. A whole crowd of noble women asked Lady Lydia in bewilderment if she was okay. They were horrified and said that this commie was a freak, but fortunately nothing happened. For a long time, people in the banquet hall came up to her and chatted incessantly. Sometimes it even seemed as if they were at her autograph session. Thanks to Sir Darbury's iron border, any man regardless of age could not approach her. Despite the sweet, "I want to greet the lady" look, he remained firm in his opinion. The knight even took small children away from the lady, which surprised our heroine incredibly. The guy, however, smiled as he looked at the lady and told her that he was only following orders. Soon night fell on the street. Our heroine smoothly moved from the banquet hall to her room. Right now, she was sitting on the bed and reading a book about this place once again. She finally found what she was looking for: information about the three gods that exist in this world: the god of time, the god of love, and the god of destruction. If what the temple of the worshippers of the god of time had prepared for the goddess were beads that turned back time, then, in the temple that worships the god of love, they prepared a shawl of charm. And here is what was said about it in the book. According to tradition, other people should not hate the goddess. She should be loved by everyone, and the gift prepared by them will help her in this. It was a shawl of charm. If the goddess wore it, then everyone who saw her would begin to feel something more than ordinary sympathy for her. They will feel a sense of longing from members of the same sex, and love from members of the opposite sex, and the affection between family and friends will become even deeper. Reading this, our heroine understood that she only had to steal the treasure of the temple that worshipped the god of love. Then Ari will be able to win Essie's heart without any problems. He asks why she remembered about it only now. There was a good reason for this. First, Agrita did not use the shawl of charm because everyone loved her without it. Even those who were envious and jealous of her, when they fell under the influence of her kind heart, eventually fell in love with her, even without the help of the shawl of charm. The effectiveness of the shawl was great, but its owner did not find it particularly useful. Even the shawl of charm could not avoid being forgotten in the closet. The most important reason is that the main character of the book, Agrita's lover, is the crown prince who knew about the existence of the shawl. As a result, this genius allegedly accidentally burned it. He got rid of the temple's precious gift in one day without hesitation. In this, they were similar to Essie. That's why the shawl of charm was barely mentioned in the book. But in any case, our heroine decided that she would steal the shawl of charm and give it to Ari. However, in reality, it was not as easy as it seems. She simply stole the beads, but will it be possible to do it all again? If you are a temple, then their structure is most likely similar, and the method by which the treasures were hidden is probably the same. Lydia began to pray to God, asking him to make sure that this time the theft would be successful. Stealing is wrong, but she does it to survive. Of course, it is very unwise to pray to God for the successful theft of the temple treasure, but that is how our heroine spent the night, stirring the heart together with shameless prayer. Our heroine told herself that she would steal the shawl of charm from the temple of love, and if with its help, Ari would be able to charm Essie, then Lydia will definitely use this opportunity to escape from her evil brother perfect plan. If she had her way, she would steal the shawl right now and run away from here. But she cannot recklessly visit the temple where the god of love is worshipped. You need to send a preliminary request and get permission. If the donation does not exceed a certain amount, permission will not be granted. Lydia immediately thought about it. Are the guys from there really engaged in some kind of business? It even smells like impudent traitors. Anyway, the lady called the butler and handed him the letter, asking him to send this letter to the temple. The man looked at her in surprise and asked if she was really going there. The girl looked at him and said that she was. In that case, the man decided to ask her why she was going there. She hates temples, doesn't she? Lydia, perplexed, said that it was not so. It was simply a period of hurricane rage, overwhelmed by resentment at the miserable fate of the past life. It's not that she outright hates temples, but rather that she just developed an interest in a temple that worships the god of love. Smiling sweetly, our heroine looked at the butler and told him that the god of love sounded very romantic. The man reminded her that she considered him a selfish narcissist. Our heroine asked him to forget about it because it was in the past. At that moment, she pointed out that it was already lunchtime, so she changed the subject. The action takes us to the dining room, where at that moment, Sir Darbury killed a snake that suddenly appeared. The guy looked at her in bewilderment and asked the lady how long their bad luck had been going on. He was surprised that strange incidents were happening several times a day. It was really strange, because this snake suddenly appeared while they were having dinner. While it was heading towards Ari, it was caught by Darbury and cut into 2 pieces. This morning there was also a disaster. A huge frame almost fell on the girl's head, and the one who saved her from this was, of course, Sir Darbury. She had been told that this year would be one of exceptional bad luck. Ari and Lydia were a little amused by this, but it was not surprising. Sir Darbury, however, was not so cheerful. He scratched his head in wonder and told the girls that they should be careful. Our heroine at this point reminded him of how he had just caught a snake. The girl asked if anyone else could have handled it quite well except him. The snake simply crept up very quietly, so quietly that he and Ari noticed it only when Sir Darbury killed it. The knight told the lady that he managed to catch the snake because it was him. If it had been an ordinary knight, he would have most likely drawn his sword when the snake bit its target. In that case, our heroine dared to suggest that Sir Darbury was unusual. The guy laughed and said, "How could it be otherwise?" At first glance, it sounds like a joke, but in fact, it is true. Darbury Suck is one of the most talented in the Whitgreen family in terms of sword skills. Rumor has it that if only he had a different background, he would have taken a leadership position in the imperial palace. But what's more important is that Essie is the one who simply took him for his talent, regardless of any other factors. There is no need to talk about his skills, because he proves them himself. Sir Darbury was able to catch this snake, but our heroine suddenly thought about who could save Ari when he was not around. If saving Ari was such a difficult task, even if she had many escorts assigned to her, their skills would not be enough, and she would still die. It was certainly rare to find someone on Sir Darbury's level. Although she suddenly thought about it and decided that Essie would take care of it anyway, our heroine understood that as soon as he fell in love with Ari, he himself would take care of and provide protection for his beloved. At that very moment, a man ran into the room screaming in incredible horror. Everyone turned their gaze to him. When he saw the dead snake, he couldn't believe his eyes. The man rushed towards it and started screaming in horror, asking Flora not to leave him. Our heroine had absolutely no idea what was happening right now, so she looked at the man in surprise. Just at that moment, the butler entered the room, addressing Lydia in a trembling voice. Our heroine asked what had happened. The man said that this man was a trader of rare animals and various goods. Some time ago, he was imagining something in the mansion, and suddenly his pet snake disappeared. He was confused, and then Lydia still decided that the responsibility for not looking after her pet lies with the owner, because Ari almost ended up in danger, and in this situation, you can even demand compensation. However, this man is also just an unfortunate victim of this world. The girl asked to give him compensation and send him home. The butler told her that she was very generous. Soon after, it became an easy, serene time. The dangers that regularly approached Ari were dealt with by Sir Darbury each time. Also, the temple's answer, which she had been waiting for, came 2 days later, albeit a little later than she expected, that the answer would arrive within a day, but still. He arrived the day after the end of the 4-day celebration, so it was just in time for our heroine. As soon as she received the letter, she quickly got ready and got into the carriage heading straight to the temple. Of course, before leaving, our heroine did not forget to explain their plan to Ari. Already in the carriage, Sir Darbury turned to the lady, asking her if she had heard the information that freak Rega had been kicked out of the family. Our heroine asked again, to which the knight reminded her of the incident at the banquet, saying that he was a depraved scum. Ari asked in surprise, was this criminal really kicked out of the family? In that case, she wondered what would happen to him. Was he no longer an aristocrat? Darbury nodded his head, indicating that this guy was now no different from an ordinary commoner. He was originally the son of a count, so he was a nobleman, but had no title. After breaking off relations with his family, the commie name completely disappears from his life. However, to do this, they must be really decisive and cut all ties. Simply telling the person to go away will not work in this case. In order to prove your plans, you need to destroy the certificate of kinship. The expulsion from the family must be documented and notarized by the palace. This makes it impossible to accept him back into the family later, which is why this rarely happens in an aristocratic society where blood decides everything. Lydia then said that Count Kami had made a firm decision when he decided to exile his son. Darbury said that this was very wise, because if the Count sheltered a criminal, they would all die together, and this was no longer a wise choice. However, our heroine suddenly had an ominous premonition. If you think about it, she heard that Essie went out somewhere yesterday. She thought he must have had some business to attend to and didn't pay much attention to it. But what if he actually went to Count Kami and threatened him? Ari, however, at that moment, turned to her sister and told her that this information was as refreshing as soda. Our heroine decided, however, that it shouldn't bother her too much, so she laughed and said that she felt as if she had drunk soda. Even though what this jerk was going to do to her was just an attempt, it seems like he did it more than once or twice, so he deserved everything he did. That's refreshing. Anyway, after some time, Ari asked in surprise how much longer they had to go. Lydia assumed that they did, because there was a long way ahead. Ari started to yawn, saying that she was feeling a little seasick. Lydia smiled and said that she understood and that she would wake her up as soon as they arrived. As a result, as soon as the girl touched her head to the back of the chair, she literally immediately fell asleep. At this moment, Darbury turned to our heroine and asked her if she had ever been to the Temple of Love. Our heroine said she had not been there. Sir Darbury told her it was his first time too. He remembered little about visiting the temples. By the way, he said that once he did not believe in gods at all. Lydia, because of these words, once again remembered another story from the dark past. Anyway, she told him that he had thought so for a long time. Could it be that now he had come to faith? Darbury thought about it and said that in a way it was Lydia suggested that things had changed and gotten better now. As despair sets in and hope fades, doubts about the existence of gods begin to creep in. Perhaps the meeting between Darbury and Essie was the key moment that changed his faith. Our heroine told him that she understood him, but at that very moment, the carriage hit a stone, which caused them to shake very strongly, and even Ari woke up. The girl was looking around in confusion and asking what was going on. Lydia, in turn, was horrified that she almost bit her tongue off. Sir Darbury looked at Milady in bewilderment and asked her if everything was all right. The girl came to her senses and said that she was fine. However, looking outside, our heroine was in incredible shock as they found themselves in the forest. Darbury immediately asked permission to ask if they were going the right way. Lydia said that she was also new here and could guess that they were in the wrong place. The knight then decided that he would now find out from the coachman what was going on, but our heroine asked him to leave it to her. Looking out the window, our heroine realized that the carriage was going in the wrong direction. But would the coachman hear her? The girl began calling him. The man, however, did not respond to Milady's words and only continued to mutter something under his breath while driving the carriage forward. Lydia didn't understand what was happening to him when suddenly the man said that having lived his whole life as a beggar, he would not die alone. They would die together, and he would take them with him to the grave. Our heroine, of course, did not hear the coachman's mad muttering, but she herself dared to assume that he had gone crazy because he was driving the carriage to an unknown destination. At that very moment, a question ripened in her head. What time is it now? Soon after this thought, the carriage began to shake violently. Then, the girl looked out of the window and noticed that the carriage was rapidly flying towards the cliff. After thinking for a long time, the girl took out the bead of time and bit it because everything went too far. In a moment, our heroine found herself in the dining room. Darbury and Ari looked at Lydia in surprise and asked if everything was okay. Lydia returned to the dining room a day later, but her gums were still sore. Ari turned to her sister again, asking if she was okay. Our heroine stood up silently and said that everything was fine, but she would go to her room. As soon as the girl entered her room, she slammed it shut. puzzled by what she had seen as a cliff when the carriage tilted. She was riding on the very edge and they almost died. Almost went to the other world. Lydia always lived by intuition. Looking at her trembling hands in horror, she realized that death could take them all in its arms. It was quite expected that something could happen to Ari. However, when Darbury was around, our heroine was calm. How could she have known that the coachman would go crazy and decide to kill himself and them too by driving off the cliff? One way or another, the girl stood up thinking that whatever happens, everything is for the best. Now she looked at the whole situation differently. If only it were possible to live peacefully in this world. Then Lydia threw everything out of her head again and decided that there was no need to panic. The main thing was to be careful. After some time, our heroine spoke with Alex, telling him that she was appointing him as a coachman. The guy, perplexed, asked why him. Lydia decided that he was young and healthy of all the servants and also the most efficient. In general, he was the main candidate who would not cause problems. Our heroine patted him on the shoulder and said that she chose him because she had a big soul and she simply trusted him. Alex then laughed sweetly and told the lady that she certainly couldn't find anyone more reliable. He was always open and good-natured. Lydia smiled back at him and said that she had hope for him. This guy doesn't seem to know the word despondency. Having dealt with one problem one way or another, our heroine was still worried about something. To be on the safe side, she seated Darbury next to Alex and brought knights to ride with them in the carriage. Asked our heroine, in surprise, if she was nervous, to which Lydia replied that she was a little nervous. She also pulled back the curtains to see everything that was happening outside and took a watch to count the time. Now she definitely won't miss anything. As soon as all the preparations were made, our guys finally set off on their journey. However, before they could move, they suddenly stopped. Lydia asked what had happened. Darbury approached our heroine, telling the lady that a child was in the way of the carriage. Lydia didn't even have time to ask anything when suddenly a scream was heard from outside the carriage. The cause of this cry was indeed a boy who blocked the royal carriage and did not let it pass. Even Ari moved from her place at these cries and looked out of the window to see what was happening on the street. The child was about 10 years old. He was dirty and shabby. His appearance screamed that help was really needed, but Lydia said that they had to go further, and Sir Darbury and Ari looked at Milady in surprise and were surprised. The girl asked what was unclear and told Alex to go. She herself understood that under normal circumstances, she would have gone out to him without thinking. But now everything was different. The reason for this was that it was already 12:30, which meant that now all that was left was to guess what would happen this time. Darbury was still trying to stop the lady when suddenly from the child's side came not only his voice, but also the voices of adults praising him. A crowd of men came up to him, telling him that the mouse was right. The carriage of the nobility had indeed appeared here, and all he had to do was wait. The guy, almost with tears in his eyes, began to say that he kept his word, so he asked not to attack their village. Shortly after these words, the boy turned around and left the scene. One of the knights got out of the carriage and asked in surprise who all these people were. Darbury dared to suggest that they were bandits. Another knight suggested that they were in trouble. Darbury smiled and said that it was more like an abnormal situation. Taking up their blades, they began to count the number of bandits, but nevertheless, more and more people were drawn to them. Not knowing what to do, the knight told the others that no matter what happened, they must be prepared to die here. At this point, our heroine turned to Darbury and asked him if they could stop all these people. The guy asked her not to worry, because if they turned the crew around right now, they would quickly reach the guard's outpost, and he would hold off the bandits the whole time. Looking into Sir Darbury's eyes full of determination, our heroine understood that he was not lying and would really stand to the end at the cost of his own life. Our heroine, however, was not going to risk her best knight, so when she took out the bead, she broke it again. After some time, she woke up in her bed. Lydia now realized that in the current situation, going out with Ari was a bad idea. At first, she thought that bad things were happening because she was careless, so she thought that with planning, everything would be fine, but perhaps something else was important. The annoying thing was that it took 2 beads to understand that it was not worth leaving the estate. Unlike the usual robbers, there were many more of these guys. No matter how you look at it, they were in the minority. Getting into such a difficult situation is not just an unfortunate coincidence. If you think about it within the home, all the problems are quite small, like broken vases and picture frames. But when Ari was in the square, she encountered much more serious events. The collapse of the clock tower, and an explosion. Our heroine did not understand why everything was so hard, and soon began to grieve because she had lost 2 whole beads. But what was even sadder was not this, but the fact that if they went somewhere again, then together, then another collapse would happen. She has no choice but to leave Ari at home and go to the temple herself. But who will protect her from the dangers in the estate? Even if Lydia managed to steal the shawl, Ari might die in her absence, and all would be in vain. However, it would be wrong to trust it to any servant. Lydia knew that Darbury would follow her anyway, but she still decided that she should at least try to persuade him. After some time, she came to him to discuss it, but the guy said that it was impossible. It was too obvious. However, the girl continued to beg him. Darbury suddenly asked her if he would be killed if he disobeyed the order, and did her such a favor. He also explained that no one had as many talents as he did, and no one had the same power. Lydia said that he was right, and that was exactly what she meant. With his outstanding abilities, he must protect Ari in the manor. Darbury still stood his ground, telling her that it was completely out of the question because his duty was to protect Lady Lydia. He asked why he didn't ask someone else to look after Miss Grace if she was so worried. Lydia, however, knew she couldn't, and so she asked him. It did not seem that there was another knight in the estate who could match Darbury in strength, although there were several. Such gifted individuals were entrusted with work that was appropriate to their level. She couldn't ask them to look after Ari. However, the girl suddenly thought about it, because if it were Essie's order, they would undoubtedly think about it. At that very moment, the last option came into her head, which was the last hope. She ignored Darbury's question, so she simply turned around and ran in an unknown direction. The easiest and most obvious way to solve this problem is to turn to Essie. However, for some time, now it has become difficult for her to ask him for anything. The problem wasn't him. Essie always offered to help her himself. She didn't even have to talk about it. She felt more and more awkward every time her brother helped her and fulfilled her whims. That was the problem, and she realized it recently. Eventually, all his worries would evaporate when he learned the truth. Soon the girl came to Essie's office, in front of which stood the knight. He asked what she wanted. Our heroine told him that she needed to talk to Essie alone. In this case, the guy nodded his head and told her that he understood her. He asked to wait a moment. Soon after, he knocked at his lordship's door, saying that Miss Lydia had come to see him. The guy left the room at that very moment and asked his sister to come in. Essie immediately asked what she wanted. Lydia sheepishly asked if she could ask him for something if he was free. The guy said that even if he was busy, it didn't matter because he would listen to her, or maybe she would like to have some tea first. Our heroine refused, but thought about it. What would be better to say? She can't just say that she wants to steal the shawl, but she leaves Ari at home because her life is in danger. However, the girl said that she needed to go to the Temple of Love for a while, so she hoped for her brother's help in finding an outstanding knight who would take care of Ari during her absence. The guy asked how outstanding this knight should be, to which our heroine answered him that he should be like Sir Darbury. Was it really necessary to explain in more detail the requirements for the candidate, or would such a gifted person simply not agree to carry out such an assignment? Essie suddenly said that if someone like Darbury was needed, he would do it. Our heroine asked again, in bewilderment. The guy answered her that Sir Darbury would remain at the estate and he would go with her. Our heroine, nevertheless, looked at Essie's desk in surprise and asked if he was busy. The guy took a sip of tea and soon reminded her that none of this mattered. In this case, our heroine realized that now she would have to go on a third trip with Essie. After some time, the carriage was about to set off, and Sir Darby joyfully saw off my lady on her way. The girl was perplexed when she told him that he had refused her at first, and now he looked like politeness itself. He had said that he would not change his decision. The boy said that there was heaven above them all, and they had no right to discuss its decisions. As punishment, he could pronounce her name as many times as he wanted. With a heavy sigh, the girl headed to the carriage and soon asked her brother to climb inside. After they were ready to leave, our heroine asked Sir Darby to take care of Ari. The guy happily said that she could rely on him, so they were looking forward to meeting soon. After some time, they were on their way. Our heroine looked at her brother and understood that they should return as soon as possible because he had a lot of things to do. By the way, it was strange that the coachman was now driving the carriage as smoothly and without shaking as possible. The carriage was moving too calmly. However, it was not surprising because Essie was sitting inside, tall and strong. Looking at his perfect, flawless features, she realized that it was difficult for people to remain calm around him, even if they didn't know who he was. Lydia suddenly wondered, what if they had not known each other? And, for example, their first meeting had taken place on the day of the ceremony. Of course, it is possible that she could be scared, but if madness remained a secret for her, then communication would probably be much more pleasant. But she still knew the truth from the book, so she tried to keep him at a distance. At that moment, Essie opened his eyes, and noticing his sister's intense gaze, he assumed that she wanted to ask something. Lydia was surprised that he was not asleep, but in that case, she decided to ask him if he had been to the Temple of Love before. The guy said that he had never been there. This meant that this was his first trip. After all, the Western Temple of Love is a rather famous place, which means it would be quite interesting to see it. Essie told her that he wasn't particularly drawn there. He was more interested in what exactly was drawing her there. The girl looked away and said that she just wanted to look at the views. The boy nodded his head and said that he understood her. Soon after, he closed his eyes again. Our heroine noticed that he looked very tired. She could tell by the way he closed his eyes again, with difficulty. What surprised her was that despite his tiredness, he still went with her. In any case, she decided not to look for deep meaning in this, because the trip was going very comfortably. By the way, soon they were already approaching their destination. As soon as she stopped abruptly, our heroine suddenly jumped up because she'd been sleeping earlier. Lydia didn't even notice how she fell asleep. And of course, she was wondering how long she slept. Just as she was about to leave, Essie got ahead of her to offer his hand to his sister. Soon, our heroine raised her head and noticed the facade of the Temple of Love in front of her. The girl was surprised that it was possible to get here quickly and without problems. One way or another, she was also interested in how Ari was doing. Her thoughts were soon interrupted by the words of a minister of the Western Temple of Love who came out to greet the guests. Our heroine introduced herself and then introduced her brother, Essie Whitgreen. The girl said that she had heard a lot about them, so she was glad to see them. Then she looked at Essie and said enthusiastically that the rumors were true. He really is very handsome. However, she then decided to say that they were both beautiful, like something wonderful. Lydia, of course, was glad to hear these words, but she wondered why the temple servant was looking only at Essie. In any case, this was the least of her interests because the operation, stealing the shawl, began right now. Soon, the girl said that, to put it briefly, their temple was built about 300 years ago. Our heroine was worried because the temple's exterior looks a little different, but the interior structure is exactly the same as in the Temple of Time. In that case, she knew that the location of the room she needed would be the same, a secret place hidden in the room where the highest spiritual servant stayed. This is where the Shawl of Charm is located. Lydia definitely read the passage in the book that told how to get the shawl. It should be easy enough to get it if the storage method is the same as the beads. All she has to do is get into the high servant's room. The temple was built thanks to the believers, so she didn't think there would be any guards near the room she needed. Moreover, she was sure of it. But the main thing was not to make noise. Lydia would be invisible like a ghost, so no one would notice her. Meanwhile, the minister showed the prayer room, where one could leave a donation and pray to God. The girl told the guests that as soon as they finished the prayer, she would show them in turn the small auditorium, the large reception room, and the large prayer room. The attendant would have liked to take them to the large prayer room first, but the high priest was praying there now. Lydia asked again in surprise. The girl said that everything was correct, and if they wished to observe him, she would warn the high priest about it. Our heroine smiled, and with eyes like a cat, said that it was not worth doing. She understood that this was her chance. If the high priest runs away now, it only means that the room she needs is now empty. However, Lydia decided to ask the minister what she would do while they were in the prayer room. The girl said that she had no right to disturb their prayer, so she would wait for them in the corridor. Lydia said even more joyfully that she understood her. Soon after they found themselves alone in the room, our heroine immediately began to think about how she could quickly escape from here. Get from here to the room of the high servants, quickly pick up the shawl, and go back. Lydia asked the thieves of the world to grant her their powers. However, the girl understood that if she went out into the corridor, nothing would work. So the place where she can't be identified is, of course, the window. Going out through it is the best option. Our heroine immediately fixed her gaze on her brother, and they met. Lydia told him that she needed to go somewhere for a short while, but she quickly. Lydia asked if he could wait for her, but the guy said that was out of the question, and that he would go with her. Thus they set out on their journey. By the way, it was not so difficult to find the room of the high servants, because the interior was the same as the Temple of Time, which our heroine had recently successfully robbed. No matter who built them, they all look like the creator didn't bother and simply copied the structures. And so finally they got there, the Temple of Love, the room of the high servants. Lydia told her brother that they were finally there. As she approached the shelf, she knew she had to push on it to reveal a secret space. She couldn't do it the first time, so her brother came up to her and pressed the shelf. Soon after, the door opened, and they found themselves in a secret room. Great. Looking at the chest inside, our heroine dared to assume that the shawl was kept in it. The moment was similar to when she stole the time beads. Anyway, she slowly walked towards the chest. At that moment, our heroine heard Essie laugh and asked what was going on. The guy told her that it was just funny. Our heroine never fully understood whether it was about her or about the situation itself, but that doesn't matter now because there were much more important things. At first glance, this chest might seem ordinary, but in fact, it was imbued with divine power. The girl understood that it would not be possible to open it just like that. There was a magic that would allow the door to open only if the letters that made up the password were chosen correctly. It was something like unlocking a smartphone. However, the girl tried to keep the same code as in the Temple of Time. Lydia poked at the buttons, thinking that the god worshipped in this temple is Azamor, the god of love. When the signs disappear, the chest should open. However, instead of the desired success, an error popped up, causing the program to start beeping incredibly loudly. Our heroine didn't understand what was going on and why the password was wrong. In any case, she understood that at this rate, they could be caught. Using the name of the deity worshipped in the temple, wasn't it written in the book that this was an absolute rule? Soon after, the loud noises and panic silence set in. Fortunately, everything stopped. However, our heroine had no idea what the code could be, other than the name of the god. Could it really be another password? Amour, Eros, Cupid. Lydia typed in all the names of the gods of love that she knew, but none of them fit. How could that be? Our heroine understood that if the alarm went off again, they could be caught. Essie, meanwhile, looked around. At that moment, a voice was heard, which spoke in confusion about the sound coming from inside. The girl immediately grabbed her brother, realizing that they needed to hide. In the end, in their haste, they had to hide behind the podium, and yet she was glad that she had blocked the entrance with a bookshelf. Meanwhile, the guards understood that the sound was coming from here, but they also understood that there was no one there. Was it just their imagination? Another knight said that if he had heard correctly, the intruders might have already escaped, so they should go and look around the area. Soon, one of the knights left the room, and only one remained inside, saying that he would catch up with him. Hearing the sound of the door closing, our heroine thought that they had left. However, a moment later, there was a click, and soon a voice was inside their room, asking if anyone was there. Lydia held her breath. The knight looked around, and still thought that this could not be, because only a few people knew about this place. Soon after the door closed again, it seemed that this time they had definitely left, thank heavens. Our heroine tried to get up, saying that something irreparable could have happened, when suddenly she fell on her brother. Essie grabbed Lydia and looked into her eyes and asked if she was okay. Our heroine was still so close that her heart was pounding too much. Was it because the tension from the recent shocks had not yet passed? Having put her thoughts aside, one way or another, the girls jumped up from their seats and headed towards the chest. At that moment, the idea came to her mind to write not the god of love, but the god of beauty liar. After that, the chest actually opened. Could this password really be correct? This is a temple worshipping the god of love. She suggested that they should be punished for blasphemy. The nun, by the way, could not take her eyes off Essie's face, which made her think that beauty is a gift from God. That's why the girl decided to try this option. It's amazing that beauty is first of all love. One way or another, our heroine understood this back when she spoke about monetary offerings. Shortly after Lydia opened the chest, Essie rose from the ground and asked her if she had accomplished what she wanted. Holding the shawl of charm in her hands, our heroine told him that their business here was finished, so it was time to go. After a while, they returned to the prayer room, fortunately without problems. Our heroine suddenly asked Essie for his jacket. The guy decided not to argue with her too much, so he gave his sister a jacket, and she put it on, thereby hiding the shawl. Essie suddenly looked at his sister and said that if this was all she wanted, she should have told him back at the estate, and he would have stolen it. Lydia, of course, wondered how. She couldn't imagine Essie committing the theft in the same way she did. In his case, after stealing the temple's high priest, he would most likely have received the shawl through threats and killed the confessor so that he would not blab. Our heroine got goosebumps all over her body just from imagining this. Although she doesn't steal, she doesn't wish such evil on anyone. The girl smiled sweetly and said that it wasn't worth it because stealing it herself was worth it. She immediately decided that it sounded stupid. In any case, they decided to go. As soon as they left, the attendant asked if everything was okay. Noticing Lydia, she assumed that the room was cool. Our heroine, however, said that she was in fact cold even before coming here. The girl said in horror that the seasons were changing very quickly now. Then she asked if she could treat them to tea in the reception hall. Our heroine started showing her acting skills again, saying that there is no need to worry about them so much. They have finished praying, so they will go back. Lydia said that her soul was exhausted with the desire to enjoy the temple views longer, but it was starting to get cold. The attendant was sorry that she could not help in any way. However, our heroine saw with the naked eye that the only thing she regretted was letting Essie go. One way or another, the servant of the Temple of Love asked to be allowed to accompany them to the exit. As she walked, our heroine thought that after she stole the shawl of charm, she would not have the courage to visit the temple again. At that very moment, she screamed in horror, thinking that she had forgotten about the offerings she was supposed to leave in their prayer room. In fact, the temple's treasure was stolen, so it must be surprising that in such a situation, she would be bothered that she did not leave an offering. However, that was the point. If she left the offerings, she would make amends to her conscience a little. In that case, she asked the attendant to wait a little. Lydia walked up to her brother and said that she needed to go back to the prayer room for a minute, so he should wait for her here. After a while, Lydia stopped on her way to the prayer room to leave an offering. Is there a more conscientious thief like her? At that moment, a stranger was walking towards our heroine and accidentally touched her. Our heroine immediately noticed that the shawl of charm had fallen to the floor. An unknown voice apologized, saying that she had dropped something. He lifted the shawl to hand it to the stranger, and Lydia suddenly noticed the gold embroidery on the white fabric. At first glance, it was obvious that the clothes were expensive. At that moment he wrapped her in a shawl. It was a rather familiar feeling for her. However, at that moment, the guy smiled and told the girl that this shawl suited her very well. Seeing this guy's face, our heroine realized in horror that the crown prince was standing right in front of her. Dazzling blonde hair that resembles the sun's radiance. Green eyes that seem to have absorbed all the green in the world. The male protagonist is both the universe and Agrita's lover. He is the crown prince of Ygritte, who will later ascend to the throne. Our heroine didn't understand what she was doing here, but she still decided to introduce herself, saying that she was Whitgreen, the junior mistress of these lands. The guy suddenly told her that he had seen her before. Lydia smiled and said that she was honored that he remembered her. In the original, the crown prince was a man who loved to lean over everywhere. If it weren't for his tendency to walk so much, they would have crossed paths much more often. One way or another, the girl decided that it was time for her to get back to business, so she thanked him and wished that God would bless them to meet again. However, as soon as our heroine turned around, the crown prince turned to her and asked her to stop. Our heroine didn't understand why he was staring at her, when suddenly, at that moment, he told her that her curls looked like roses in bloom. Our heroine didn't understand why he was behaving like that. Maybe he ate something bad? She knows that Agrita treated everyone without exception, in a simple manner, unlike her who behaves formally. She is not the person who should receive compliments from the prince. Once again, she wondered why the prince was addressing her in this way, when suddenly our heroine noticed the shawl of charm and realized that it was her doing. Thus, the crown prince became the first guinea pig, but thanks to this, she noticed this immediate effect. However, it was not for nothing that it was the temple's jewel. In any case, she thanked the prince, and in return, complimented his hair, which looked like rays of the scorching sun. The guy asked, in surprise, if she really liked them. Lydia asked him again in surprise. Ygritte asked, in response, if she liked the color of his hair. For example, he liked it. Our heroine decided that this sounded rather narcissistic, but perhaps he had intended it differently. The crown prince was nicknamed the Iron Wall among the young ladies. But couldn't she get into trouble? She even hid the shawl of charm. It is amazing that this arrogant temple created something truly frightening in its power. Lydia took his words as compliments, but she did not deserve such an honor. So she again asked for forgiveness, but she had to go. After that, she started to leave, but noticed the prince watching her. Lydia hoped that he would not follow her. Halfway there, she stopped again, because once again, she caught herself thinking that she had forgotten to leave offerings. After some time, she returned to her brother and decided to forget about it. Essie asked if she had finished, to which the girl nodded her head. The action takes us to His Highness, who has finally been found by the supreme servant. The man looked at the prince in surprise and asked if he was lost again. He reminded him that he had said that the waiting room was in a different place. He was very surprised to see him on his way. The prince apologized, saying that it was an inconvenience to him as well. The man was nevertheless glad that His Highness was aware of his own shortcomings, perfectly mastering all the subtleties of literature, and gifted with many other talents. The crown prince, Ygritte Hayden. In reality, he had terrible spatial orientation, and the problem was quite serious. But why did so few people around him know about it? No one suspected how wrong the direction of his movement was, since it seemed to everyone that he was going that way out of his own desire. The high servant was one of the few who knew the truth. The prince suddenly said to the servant, "Truly a temple of love." The man, perplexed, asked what he was talking about. A face with feline features that betrayed her conflicting inner feelings. Also, her hair was scarlet, matching the blooming roses in the garden. Had he ever had such feelings when meeting her? Thinking about Milady Lydia Whitgreen, he realized that they had only crossed paths a couple of times at balls. However, he definitely did not remember that at that moment, her appearance brought him such admiration as now. Anyway, he decided that it was wonderful to meet beautiful people. He hadn't had that for a long time. Some time ago, one of the servants addressed the prince, telling him that he would soon find love. Hayden asked again, in surprise, to which the girl told him that he would meet his destiny within this year. One of the ministers approached his friend and asked her since when she became a fortune teller. At that moment, he did not attach any importance to this prediction, because in the Temple of Love, they always say such words, but in fact, he would like the prophecy to come true. The action, meanwhile, moves to a dark night, to a building under the roof, of which a character familiar to us was sleeping. This man was Riga, who was tormented by nightmares and woke up in a cold sweat almost every night. The boy muttered madly and cursed Essie Whitgreen. His family had abandoned him, and that bastard was going to kill him. He had nothing left, all his money, positions, surroundings, and even part of his body were simply taken away. At the ceremony, he was found to have drugged Milady Whitgreen's drink. He tried to get away with it by taking a hostage, but to no avail. The guy thought he was unlucky, but could he have imagined that things would turn out this way? After all those proceedings, he lost his position. As soon as he was deprived of his noble origin, he was completely removed from the family tree. Even watching as the documents of kinship were torn up in front of his face, the guy did not take the whole situation seriously. On paper, even though he was cut off from the family, he was a blood son. Parents couldn't drive away their own son, right? The only thing that was offensive was that he would not be able to inherit anything, but that did not mean that he would be kicked out of the mansion immediately. Later he thought that he would not have problems as long as he lived quietly and peacefully, but he was thrown out of the house empty-handed. He tried to contact them, but he could not. Also, if you go straight to the main gate of the house, you will be driven away just like any other commoner. While thinking about what Whitgreen was afraid of, something amazing happened because Duke Whitgreen appeared in the alley right in front of him. They looked at him and said that if he did not answer their questions, they would cut off each one in turn. As soon as he laughed, Whitgreen tackled him to the ground, telling Darbury to cut off the next part. The guy was shaking in horror and telling them that they shouldn't do this because he would tell everything. The blow followed again. Darbury looked at the Duke in bewilderment, asking why he had brought him here if he could do everything himself. The guy said that it was noisy here, so if he wanted to do something he needed to be taken, or a doctor needed to be called and helped. Darbury looked at Riga and told him that if he lived long, his life would be like hell. He said it was for his own good. Anyway, just then the Duke stepped forward. As soon as the Duke left, Darbury sat down near Riga, and taking out his dagger, he also revealed his mad smile. The boy swung his blade and cut his ankle. He grabbed Riga by the face and asked him if this wasn't better than cutting off his fingers. Hearing no answer, the boy told him that if he did nothing, he would not be happy. Even thinking about the dirty things he tried to do to his girl makes him want to kill him right now. It would be easy to let him live, but he would have to put up with it. Once again, Riga returned to reality after his terrible nightmare. The guy was holding his face in horror, realizing that he would be killed. He cursed these freaks who made him like this, the woman who is the culprit. Meanwhile, our heroine's donations, which remained in the prayer hall, were eventually delivered through the priest. At first, the priest looked at it in bewilderment, but Lydia gave it to him like a bag of money. It was all her conscience. Yes, our heroine may be a thief, but she still had a conscience, even though she went too far. After some time, our heroes returned back to the palace, and Darbury was just waiting for them. The guy helped them out and immediately asked if they liked the trip to the temple. Half asleep, our heroine told him that her soul would be impressed. Lydia assumed she would die after only half a day's carriage ride. Essie, by the way, was perfectly fine. After such a long trip, the first thing our heroine did was take a bath and collapse onto her soft bed. Our heroine suddenly remembered that she had met a prince in the temple. If she remembered correctly, it seemed that this was also in the book. The beginning of autumn is when the weather changes. Lately, the heir to the throne has been feeling a bit empty. He visits the Temple of Love to see if he can find the reason for his feelings. She thought it was just autumn, but he said that within a year he would meet his destiny. He hears a prophecy that is not a prophecy at all. Later, in a deserted alley, as if by fate, he meets Agrita and remembers the prophecy. Anyway, that was why he was in the temple. But why was he in this distant temple of love at such a time? With a heavy sigh, our heroine decided that she was simply unlucky to meet him there, at least in that place, at that time. If she meets him when she has the shawl of charm, with her a young girl who barely knows his face, will he say that phrase again? If the prince is sane, how will he remember it? Isn't he left with a history of suffering in the blanket? She suddenly wondered why he didn't just give her the shawl back and wrap it around her neck. Immediately she wondered, wasn't it just kindness that he picked up what had fallen to the floor and wrapped it around her neck? Maybe bad luck was also luck. However, she felt very sorry for the prince because he had a good memory. Could she get the blessing of oblivion as soon as possible? Just at that moment, Ari ran into the room, asking her sister how her trip to the temple had gone. Was everything okay? Our heroine, nevertheless, turned away from Ari suspiciously and began to laugh slyly. Soon after, she turned around and proudly showed off the shawl of charm that she had taken from the Temple of Love. Ari asked in surprise if she could touch her. Lydia told her that she could do so, but only touch. Our heroine stared at Ari's face, which radiated incredible admiration. The girl suddenly asked if they had stolen her right. Was it difficult, or did they manage without problems? Our heroine realized in horror that they were almost caught as criminals, and she almost didn't guess the password. Anyway, she proudly said that it didn't matter how she stole it, because they had it. Ari told her sister that she was smart. The girl then took the shawl in her hands and asked if anyone who saw it actually fell in love with it. It looked like just ordinary fabric. Now, the charm, not to mention the color and pattern, even if there is nothing tangibly special about the material, if it were not for the prince's sacrifice, she would not know whether the shawl worked. Our heroine looked at Ari one way or another and suggested that she see for herself. Lydia didn't even wait for a moment to get an answer from Ari, and silently wrapped her shawl around herself. The girl's face changed to shock and bewilderment. In a moment, she began to see her sister differently. Our heroine looked at the girl anyway and asked her how she felt about it. Ree laughed sheepishly, saying that she almost proposed to her sister. It was dazzling, and if she were a man, he would definitely propose to her. Or if same-sex marriages were legal, women would propose too. Still, it was interesting how it worked. Lydia told her that if she didn't tell her, maybe they wouldn't know, because it was magic. Ari also decided to put on a shawl of charm and show the effect to Lydia. Our heroine was instantly captivated by Ari's beauty, so the idea of a proposal immediately popped into her head. Soon, Lydia said that even though she was joking about the proposal, it was interesting. She didn't even know how to express it correctly. It seemed to her as if Ari had a halo when she first put on the shawl. Her heart was pounding, and she wanted to come closer and pretend to know. Somehow, she overcame the urge to win someone's affection. It's like a nerd in a teen drama. Our heroine suddenly thought that if she wore such a thing, she would rather be called a witch than a goddess. The crown prince burned the shawl of charm because it was probably for Agrita's safety. With the great name of the Temple of Love, which she knows because she was a snob, the existence of this absurd treasure is something she is grateful for. Now Ari will use this shawl to attract Essie's attention so that she can escape as planned. Just at this moment, Ari got up from the bed and asked if she would really use the shawl of charm to seduce the villain from now on. Our heroine laughed sheepishly and told her that it was Ari, however said that she was worried, but Lydia reminded her of the shawl effect, so everything would be fine. Ari, in turn, reminded that she would be dealing with a villain. To do so with a beautiful, perfect, and kind sister. Lydia didn't understand where this perfection came from again. Was it because she was good at stealing? Lydia asked if she was afraid of Essie. The girl, perplexed, said that it was because it was quite exciting. He was a villain. Our heroine knew better than anyone that Essie was a villain. But sometimes when he smiles at her, it's hard to take your eyes off him. Come to think of it, Ari didn't pay attention to Essie from the very beginning. She thought it was because he was the male lead. At that moment, the girl told our heroine that she was right, because Essie really was very handsome. It was the first time she saw someone who looked like that. Ari suddenly looked at our heroine and asked her what she would do since her eyes and hair were not black. Our heroine said that she is apparently Korean to the core, so if the color of her hair and eyes is colorful, she does not feel like a human being. Ari suggested that it was like looking at a beautiful painting or statue. Lydia said that was basically true. Even in her past life, she liked actors with multicolored hair. In any case, the girl looked at the shawl and asked in surprise where and when she could use it. She decided that it would be wrong to wear it always and everywhere. Lydia said she was right because it was trash. If word got out while she was writing, she would be taken to the capital. So if that's the case, that means Ari will have to use it when she's alone with Essie. The girl, perplexed, said that she would need help. Then she asked Lydia what she was doing tomorrow. Our heroine answered her that tomorrow she would save her guards, which they would need. The action moves to the next morning. The idea that Ari needs personal protection came to our heroine a long time ago. Sir Darby is certainly a near-perfect knight, so while he is her guard, there are many limitations to protecting Ari. For example, the hostage taking in the banquet hall, Darby abandoned Ari to protect her by any means necessary. As a result, the defenseless Ari was taken hostage and thus put into danger. If it weren't for Essie, she would have died once. Maybe our heroine would have used the beads again. It may happen in the future, but Darby does his duty, so he can't be blamed. By the way, also, because Sir Darby is always around, Ari had to be with her to receive help from him. Unfortunately, trouble comes even early in the morning, and Ari had no choice but to get up early and come to Lydia. It wasn't for 1-2 days, but because she got up early, it seems the girl complained of fatigue. Lydia assumed that she slept a lot in the morning, so if she had personal security, she would be able to sleep longer, to see a problem, but not to solve it. It was impossible to find a man as talented, similar, or better than Sir Darby. He thought it was enough to entrust Ari's protection to the future, but it was not a fundamental decision. Even after she left, Ari would need good protection. But is there another solution now that wasn't there before? Of course there is, and that solution is the shawl of charm. After a while, the girl interrupted our heroine's thoughts and asked her sister if she could really save the guards. Holding an unknown document in her hands, Lydia asked to trust her and not ask unnecessary questions. The palace hosts at least 2 fencing competitions a year, a flower festival in the spring, a harvest festival in the fall, and other national holidays. Of course, the holidays are not complete without tournament events. This means that many promising fencers emerge during the year. Lydia was just thinking about taking one of them as a personal guard for Ari. In the morning, she sent people to the guild to buy information. Winners of all official fencing tournaments for 5 years. This document contained personal data and location of those who were not serving anyone yet. Winning the tournament proves their exceptional skills. Of course, families who need talent will try to hire them. Either way, the fact that they haven't joined anyone yet shows how high their standards are. Among the 4 best knights, by the way, there was also 1 female swordswoman. At this point, while our heroine was studying the information, Darby turned to her and said that it would not be easy. Our heroine certainly didn't want to hear these words, so she asked him in bewilderment what he was talking about. The guy said he was just describing the situation because such people usually want money or status. However, Sir Darby says so because he has not yet heard of the shawl of charm. Only Lydia knows of this fact, and she had a way. Our heroine proudly told the knight that everything was fine and that she would show him an unusual situation. A noble and proud knight, of course, simply cannot break a contract that he himself signed. That's why our heroine is going to use the shawl of charm and simply forced the knight to sign a contract with Ari. The shawl of charm was already like an addiction, although it was even somehow villainous. Among the nobles, the personal knight is a servant. She heard that there are many people who resort to rudeness and vile things. Looking at Ari, she realized that compared to these nobles, Ari was just an angel, kind and sweet. No guard could resist her for sure. Incidentally, among the winners on the list, Linda Affel was the only female knight. When choosing the best candidate, Lydia thought about finding a guard that would always be close to Ari, so it would be best for her to be with a woman if possible. That's why our heroine decided to go to Mrs. Linda Affel first. She's going to melt her heart with a shawl of charm. After some time, our heroes finally met her, but the girl immediately disappointed them. Showing her hand, she said that her left hand was injured. She hoped that they knew about it before they came and hired her. Lydia and the others were silent in confusion. The girl told them that the wound was serious, so she needed time to regain control of the sword like before. Soon she headed back to the house, saying that if they needed her, then they could come back next year. Darbury sighed and told the lady that it was all good, because the first pancake was always lumpy. He assumed that she wanted to speak out before she was rejected again. Lydia looked at him with despair and asked him to shut up. Ari, in turn, wished her sister luck. With a heavy sigh, our heroine said that there was nothing she could do about it. Next on the list was Sir Brand Villain. There were 3 more candidates, so all was well. By the way, Brand Villain won 2 tournaments in a row and proved himself as a talented swordsman. It would be great if he became Ari's guard. After some time, they came to him. Understanding why people came to him, he said the sum of 100,000 gold. That's how much they would have to pay him per year. Lydia decided that she should refuse. It was too much. Even if you were 3 times rich, such a sum would be difficult to pay. The most surprising thing was that Brand Villain didn't even bat an eye when he mentioned this number. Lydia smiled sweetly at him and said that she understood him. Then she asked him if she would like to sit down and talk. In a deserted place, even if you want, you can't refuse the shawl of charm. And then what amount can he agree to? Brand, however, said that he would not agree to less. Our heroine asked again, and the guy said that his younger brother had an incurable disease, and the entire amount was needed for his treatment, otherwise he would die. Lydia tried to hold on with all her might, not understanding where he got such a dramatic story from. The girl still wished him and his brother all the best. After a while, they were walking in the other direction. Darbury was surprised to say that not even half was left, but he was here to meet a better person. At that moment, our heroine raised her head and was surprised at how quickly the sunny weather changed to such a gloomy one. Anyway, she reassured you, saying that it was just clouds. This weather phenomenon definitely had nothing to do with today. Of course, our heroine thought so, but it turned out that she was wrong to think so, because it seemed to be a sign. The remaining 2 were no different. The first was planning to move to meet his family. The second's fiancé died, so he went to his hometown and disappeared. The girl did not understand where so many tragic stories came from. But one way or another, the main question was, what should they do now? She understood that she could use the shawl charm, regardless of their problems, because the shawl would definitely make them sign the contract. However, the problem in this case was that our heroine simply could not cast aside her humanity. It was too difficult a choice. Ari and Darbury held hands in horror because they did not know what mood Lady Lydia was in now. One way or another, they decided to defuse the situation, and therefore, they suggested going out to eat. Lydia decided to agree, because after all this time she was hungry. Sir Darbury then said that they should enjoy a delicious lunch. Before this, our heroine, of course, turned around to find out what time it was, and it was already noon. After a while, they went into one of the eateries. The waitress suggested sitting by the window, but Lydia said that they would choose another place. Soon, they came to one of the tables in the center of the room and decided to sit there. Lydia decided to go into the restaurant not only to eat, but also because Ari is dangerous to be outside. It would be much safer inside than outside. Someone could break in through the window, so Lydia decided to sit away from them. Just as they were about to order something at that moment, someone actually burst through the window and landed on the ground. Lydia looked at him, wondering if he was hiding his face with a black mask in broad daylight. Wasn't that too suspicious? Just at that moment, the guy finally came to his senses, and soon he was staring straight into the eyes of our heroine. A moment later, he started running towards them, which seriously scared the girls. Lydia knew in her heart that this was going to happen. Darby, of course, immediately grabbed his sword, but at that moment, something unexpected happened. This guy just tripped while running towards them and fell right in front of the table. Lydia looked at Darby in bewilderment and asked if he really possessed the art of invisible light. The guy, not understanding what was happening, assumed that this was exactly it. However, at that moment, another knight followed this guy into the restaurant through the window. The stranger stood up and looked at his target and asked him if he really hoped to escape from him. Lydia did not understand who he was. Anyway, the knight approached the guy, telling him that he was still very green. The girl looked at him in bewilderment and asked how he dared to rob someone in broad daylight. He couldn't even find an empty house. A strong kick followed soon after, but Sir Darby did not allow the girls to watch. The sound that followed was like a groan. Was something broken in that guy? Most likely. However, our heroine asked Darby if he knew any of them. At this time, the girl knight continued to kick this poor guy, and our heroine asked who he knew, the guy on the floor or the girl who was beating him up. Sir Darby said, "The last one. It's Dylan. She's quite famous." Our heroine, noticing her sword, assumed that she was a famous swordswoman. Lydia decided to ask how famous this girl was anyway. The guy said that she was a 5-time winner of Hidden. As far as our heroine knew, these were bets, or rather a swordsman tournament. Hidden is a small village on the outskirts of the Iranian islands. It is impossible to find it by chance, you just need to know the way there. However, about 10 years ago, the word began to mean something more than a village secret swordsman tournaments held in the village arena, where bets began to be accepted. As a result, any spectator could either win or lose by betting on the winner of the tournament. By the way, gambling involving people was illegal. There were rumors that a famous aristocrat was overseeing these tournaments. Lydia even heard that for the sake of spectacle, they don't take just anyone, but select professional fighters, regardless of their origin. Realizing that Dylan had won again, in fights without rules, where even murder was allowed, the girl decided that she was exactly what they needed. Lydia suddenly asked if she understood correctly that this girl had not yet signed a contract with any clan. Darby said that she was still earning money in Hidden. Our heroine, hearing these words, instantly changed her face to a sly smile. Realizing what was about to happen, Sir Darby tried to stop her, but to no avail. Our heroine ran up to Dylan, saying that she was glad to meet her. She introduced herself first. Looking at the swordswoman, the girl asked to distract her for a minute and pay attention. Then she looked at the ground and noticed a rock, which she hit the guy with. The precision and power were amazing, which is why Lydia liked her. However, all hopes were destroyed in the blink of an eye. Dylan screamed and said that she was against it. Lydia asked again in bewilderment, and the girl apologized and said that she did not deal with aristocrats. Now, our heroine understood. The members of Hidden do not think much of aristocrats. In their eyes, they are pigs, staging bloody spectacles for entertainment. Of course, Dylan thought that to her, she was just another rich guy who didn't consider her a human being, which in a sense was natural. Lydia didn't even think that the girl could treat the aristocrat so badly. But what to do now? She definitely can't be missed. Dylan is the person who is perfect for them. Outstanding skills, and also a woman attractive and daring. There were too many people here to use the shawl of charm. They needed to go somewhere else, where they could be alone. But what if she wasn't in the mood for conversation? Just at that moment, the girl heard the waitress apologizing to the gentleman, saying that she had already called security and that they would arrive soon. Our heroine immediately went to Dylan and told her that security was on their way here. She also asked what happened. She thinks she caught this guy because he's a thief, right? Dylan, keeping her foot on the criminal, asked what it mattered. Our heroine told her that it was of great importance to her, because even though he was a thief, where was the evidence? Dylan asked in confusion what she was talking about. Lydia explained to her that she had just turned him into a chop in front of a crowd of people. What if he said he hadn't stolen anything and had only been severely beaten? It was obvious, since he was empty-handed, he must have run away before he stole anything. And it looked like this guy just heard everything. Lydia again pointed out that there were many witnesses here who would say that she beat him, but her only argument was that he was a thief. Dylan continued to look coldly at Lady Lydia and asked in surprise what she was getting at. Our heroine smiled sweetly, looking at Dylan, and proudly said that she could give her testimony to help her. She might say something like, "This person wanted to attack me, but she was the only one who stopped and reacted." If she testifies, then even without evidence that he is a thief, her actions will be justified. There is no evidence that he wanted to attack, but the police will have enough. Our heroine asked if she agreed. As she explained, she doesn't need much because she just wants to be alone in a quiet place, and this is much better than being arrested for assault. Although reluctantly, Dylan agreed to the proposal, saying that she would only give 5 minutes. After the thief was handed over to the police, the testimony was given, and finally lunchtime passed. Then they went to Dylan's house to talk. The girl immediately said that she agreed not only because the offer was beneficial to her, but also because Ari seemed nice to her. Our heroine asked her again in surprise, and the girl said that she simply loved beautiful people. Lydia thanked her in surprise. Soon the action moves to Dylan's house. Our heroine was a little embarrassed, but she understood that if Dylan liked beautiful people, then she would definitely like Ari. Anyway, right now, our heroes were sitting in the living room and waiting for Ari and Dylan to talk. At this point, Darby suddenly turned to the lady, saying that she looked pleased. Did she really think that everything would work out? Anyway, he told her that even if she had done a lot, it would be more important for her to give Lady Grace the opportunity to show herself. Our heroine raised her hand, saying that she was sure that everything was fine. Darby still asked where she got such faith in this. Lydia asked in surprise if he didn't think it was all too good. Darby asked her if she knew why Dylan was so famous. Our heroine looked at him again in surprise and said that he himself told her that she had won 5 times in a row in Hidden. Darby said that wasn't all she had done. She had broken the wrist of an aristocrat's son who had mocked her. Lydia screamed in disbelief. The knight said it was true and that the rumors had spread very quickly. Of course, it had been several years since he had heard the story, but he still remembered it. Lydia asked how she had gotten away with it. The guy said that she was very lucky because the witness was another aristocrat who had a score to settle with the victim. This man said that he wounded while running, stumbled, and of course there were no other witnesses. Lydia asked about the special rights of the aristocracy. Darby told her that the knights could not touch her, even with the tip of a blade. Our heroine understood that she did not come out to publicly condemn her because of the witness, and physical violence did not seem possible. Now it is all clear. In this case, the girl decided that Dylan was really very strong, so she liked her more and more. Our heroine suddenly asked if there was a continuation of the story. Darby, perplexed, once again said that she had broken the aristocrat's wrist, and that was already the whole story. Lydia, however, told him that this noble scion had done something wrong. He had mocked Dylan. Ari, in turn, would not do the same, so everything would be fine. Darby suddenly remembered Essie and told Lady Lydia that brothers and sisters stay close, no matter what. But still, our heroine felt uncomfortable. She wondered if this conversation didn't bother Darby at all. She asked him if the swordswoman would harm Ari, knowing that she was alone with Dylan, and he had not told her anything. At that moment, the guy smiled slyly and turned his head to the side, as if keeping silent about something. Lydia immediately realized that he had made up the story to scare her. She laughed and said that it was unfair. Just at that moment, a joyful Ari ran into the room and told her sister that she could do it. At this time, Dylan, who was standing nearby, did not understand what she had done and how it had happened. Our heroine asked what they had come to. Ari answered that they had first made a verbal agreement and then would sign an official contract. However, Ari told her that Dylan would start accompanying her. Today, Lydia asked in surprise if she was sure about the verbal contract. However, the girl intervened in the conversation and said that she always keeps her word. Now that the contract is concluded, she is responsible for her safety. She also added that if she screwed up somewhere, they could chop off her head. Lydia thought that they weren't going to do that yet because she was more reliable than she thought. At that moment, Dylan looked at Darbury and said hello to the lucky guy, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Lydia and Ari watched them in surprise, not understanding if they knew each other. Darbury seemed to know a lot about Dylan. The guy smiled at her and said it was true. The girl said she had heard that he was doing well, but now she was convinced of it herself. Darbury told Dylan that she was pretty good looking too. Lydia, however, butted in and asked in surprise if they knew each other. The guy said that they had crossed paths in the past. Lydia decided to ask Dylan why she was acting like she knew him well. Dylan sighed heavily and said that before she didn't want to talk to a traitor who had joined the aristocrats, but now she was the same. That's why she extended her hand and told Darbury Sack that she was pleased to meet him. The guy happily extended his hand in response and said that he was also glad to meet her. Lydia and Ari still watched what was happening in bewilderment. After some time, our heroine asked in bewilderment whether the two of them were really rivals. The girl said that it was true, because their destinies were indeed closely connected, and then she was taller than him. However, based on updated information, she admitted that this ugly duckling had overtaken her. She was 181 cm tall and 26 years old, while Darbury was 185 cm tall and only 24 years old. He asked her to choose her words carefully because he has ears. Dylan sighed and told Sir Darbury that he had become too proper. There was no pleasure in teasing him anymore. Our heroine decided that this was quite interesting because in words, they are enemies, but almost perfectly suited to each other. What awaits them in the future?